We meet the main character in a field, where he was observing a strange flow of energy that took the form of a sword. A voice came from there, asking if he considered himself worthy of wielding this weapon. But the answer was not shown to us. Instead, we saw events from the past where the main character trained on the street with another guy and lost to him in the end. However, the young man was not satisfied with the result of the duel, and therefore he suggested that his opponent have another battle. From the crowd's words, it was clear that the two had been rivals for a long time, and they also had quite similar names. Indeed, the short brunette was called Leon, and his training partner, the tall blonde, was called Lion. Lion was completely different from Leon. He was adored by everyone, had good manners himself, and was also better at using weapons. After the second fight, the boys were met at the academy by an angry girl, a classmate whom others called Chloe. She complained that they were constantly competing with each other because Leon was always defeated by his much better opponent. That evening, during training, the young man thought about how his life would have changed if fate had turned out like that of another guy. At this time, Lion himself celebrated his birthday with delicious food and a large group of friends. And Leon, alone, felt disappointed in himself for his failures and resentment at his unfair life. Suddenly, as if hearing all the complaints, a large stream of energy began to fall from the sky, rapidly moving towards the guy. Meanwhile, at the party, concern arose over Leon's absence, and Chloe decided to go outside to look for him. We were also introduced to the husband, who was Lion's advisor, and the only one who knew his true identity. He told an ancient prophecy. In a year, when Lion comes of age, he will have to take the post of the new emperor. He was not very confident in his abilities yet, and so he wished to have Chloe and Leon as future assistants. However, it seemed that only the man knew another legend, according to which an all-powerful sword was supposed to appear to a guy named Lion. However, as we were able to see, such a weapon still appeared in front of the main character. At first, the young man was surprised by the fact that a talking sword existed, but he approached it out of curiosity. The voice told you that you shouldn't complain about life being unfair unless you work hard to prove it. He then gave Leon the opportunity to prove his strength to everyone who thought he was weak by using a new weapon. However, he refused this offer because he believed that working on himself was much more important. It was then that the sword decided that the young man had proven himself worthy of showing the world what he was capable of. The guy finally accepted the weapon and learned the name of his companion, Elsid, who was the hero's companion from the past. Then we meet the spirit of the sword in human form, who explained his decision to come specifically to the main character. The chosen guy does not necessarily have to have royal roots, and Lion did not have the necessary character traits. Elsid suggested that everyone watch Leon as a true hero worthy of wielding the holy sword. Leon woke up in his dorm room in the morning, wondering if he had dreamed the recent events. However, he noticed the same sword next to the wall and thus realized that all this was really happening to him. Suddenly, a blue spirit appeared in front of the guy and kept talking to the guy. He warned the hero that difficult trials await him, because it is impossible to become stronger just like that. There was a possibility that Leon would have to sacrifice his loved ones in order to achieve his cherished dream. However, the hero had already chosen this path on his own, and so from now on, he had to go through it to the end. When he realized everything, Elsid announced his first test, to show his level of swordsmanship. The whole day passed with continuous training outside, and with the sunrise, a new day began. Leon stood outside, scared because he still hadn't returned to his dorm and didn't know how to hide his new weapon. Then the sword turned into a special mark, from where it could be easily retrieved if necessary. The young man was also prescribed a set of continuous training, because only through discipline can one achieve one's dreams. However, one day, while training with a dummy sword, it immediately fell apart in his hands due to the large amount of energy. Then Elsid decided to stop this type of training and advised to start with a physical warm-up to develop muscles. The reader is told that Leon is to be the one who can defeat even the Demon King in the future. During one of the lessons at the academy, the spirit of the sword explained to the boy that he needed to train not only physical strength, but also attention. In order to determine the current level of this skill, he asked the boy to perform a simple task. First, he had to focus for 10 seconds on what was in front of him. Then you had to close your eyes for a while and answer one question about the details you saw. Leon failed this task because he only paid attention to the teacher's movements and not to all the objects around him. Then Elsid emphasized the need for the guy to use not only his usual vision, but also his peripheral vision. After this information, the young man was given the opportunity to repeat the task with new instructions. He then noticed that he could now see even more objects in his field of vision. However, there were also side effects. After a day of intensive training, the young man's eyes dried out, and then a headache began. On the advice of the sword spirit, Leon continued to train his peripheral vision outside of school hours. He answered various questions about the neighboring people and animals, and became even more tired. Elsid noted that the guy should learn to form habits and also change his training methods. Thus, the body does not have time to adapt to all the loads it has endured. All the first time, the blue creature wanted to know the guy's strengths and weaknesses, because each person has different paths of development. Leon, for example, was good at basic sword techniques, but he was not flexible in his skills because he trained the same way. Also mentioned in this conversation with the sword spirit was the aura that Lion often used during duels. This energy is usually difficult to control, so Elsid promised to switch to it after completing his studies at the academy. Leon's main goal was to train his physical strength, but a new condition was added to this. Now, after every mistake made, the guy will face a certain punishment. Indeed, such a method can serve as an excellent incentive for development, so the young man eventually resigned himself to this condition. He immediately wanted to experience a similar effect, and the sword spirit happily agreed to do so. However, this ended with him shocking the guy with a painful electric shock for 5 seconds. Elsid warned Leon that the more mistakes he made, the more severe the punishment would be, so he should be careful. And so the long days passed. The young man continuously trained his physical strength, as well as his attention and observation. One day, Leon finally got the chance to rest a little and met Lion on the street for the first time in a month without communication. The blonde noticed that his opponent no longer challenged him to fights, and his face no longer expressed reconciliation with defeat. Lion offered to talk to Leon and told him the truth about his royal origins. It turned out that he had been studying at the academy for a long time and agreed to fight with the young man only because he was another student. However, Lion decided to have one last battle with him, and the guys discussed all the conditions. If the older boy wins the battle, he will make Leon his assistant for royal affairs in the future. And if the guy loses, he will do whatever the opponent asks. But there were conditions. He could not ask about the secrets of fencing or anything that could be used against him. The young man agreed, but added something of his own. He would choose the date of the duel himself and inform Lion 3 days before. Elsid was looking forward to this event because he saw it as an opportunity to show new strength. However, Leon was not as enthusiastic as before and became more worried. The spirit of the sword was able to calm the anxious guy and promised to help him in the upcoming fight. Meanwhile, a crucial day had arrived at the academy, an endurance test, to which Leon and Lion also came. We learned that last year the younger one took 9th place in this competition, and the older one took 1st place. The essence of the test was simple. You need to run 2 large circles on the field in a shorter period of time. It turned out that students who were members of noble families could use special potions. In this way, they increased their endurance, and thus they managed to win prizes. With increased strength and speed, Leon completed 2 laps in 1 minute and 29 seconds. However, the coach doubted the guy's honesty and therefore checked his body for the presence of an aura. Indeed, for using internal energy during a school test, the young man would have been disqualified. But the coach managed to convince that there was no fraud there. After the test, Elsid explained to the young man that even human muscles have their own nerves, which also need to be trained. For example, the spirit of the sword itself did this thanks to attention training and a system of punishments for mistakes. The young man then suspected that the creature was not only a weapon, but also a part of the soul of the hero Rodrigo himself from the distant past. Meanwhile, Lion also passed their endurance test, and the results are now known. Lion took first place, as they did last year, but Leon rose from 9th to 2nd. During the missed time, the guy has already mastered his attention and memory, so it is worth focusing on physical skills. However, Elsid noted that it is too early to master fencing technique because the mechanical movements are too predictable. This is why, according to him, before mastering sword techniques, one must first open and then master the aura. Now, the main goal of training is to learn more about your strengths. This could come in handy in the event of an upcoming meeting with other opponents, not just Lion. One day, after an endurance test, Leon ran into several older guys in one of the corridors. They didn't believe the exam results because the guy without any additional solutions or aura was able to take second place. However, another one of the boys, whose name was Elmont, later intervened in this dispute. He was the son of one of the counts, and he protected the young man. So over time, all the bullying stopped. The older boy challenged Leon to a fight against himself and his friends. He thought for a moment and immediately suspected that his opponents might use their aura during them. The young man finally decided to agree to such an interesting proposal, and Elmont treated him politely during the conversation. But behind his back, he was already thinking about how he could humiliate the hero in front of the entire school. Unfortunately, Elsid couldn't give Leon any advice because he had never had any experience fighting against an opponent with an aura. Then, the spirit of the sword told the young man about a special magical system that he had created himself. With its help, one could find out the characteristics of one's own and opponents, as well as special skills and their current level. When it was Elmont's turn to be inspected, Leon was initially surprised that the system described his skills as weak. Indeed, it was known that children of the nobility often used the potion to improve their skills, and also trained from childhood. However, Elsid explained to the boy that not all people, regardless of status, are able to properly digest these solutions. More often than not, after consuming them, there will be a normal nutritional effect, without improving the skills themselves. In addition, our hero had much better training under the guidance of the sword spirit, which was a significant advantage. The day of the main character's fight against the older guys came, and the whole academy came to watch. Before the first fight, the instructor asked Leon and his opponent about their hopes for the future. The protagonist noted that he wanted to test his new strength and endurance, but his opponent had no such ambitions and only wanted the young guy to quickly be defeated. However, the older boy showed his surprisingly slow reaction speed during the battle. Leon noticed this and was able to easily defeat him with his holy sword attacks. The enemy could not admit defeat to the seemingly weak guy, and that is why he asked to organize a rematch. In the second battle, the enemy had already decided to activate his magical aura skills. After using the energy, the older boy's speed increased, and his fighting techniques changed. Since Leon had no experience fighting against an enemy with an aura, Elsid advised him to rely on his endurance. During this fight, the guy also used the Rodrigo method, the ability to anticipate the opponent's future attacks. Then, when no one expected it, the guy was able to quickly attack his opponent. The older boy then surrendered on his own, and so the young man was eventually able to win. Several more fights ended with Leon's triumphs, and so among all the older guys, only Elmont remained. Before the fight, the young man decided to once again examine the characteristics of his opponent in the system. Then he noticed that, in addition to the usual set of skills, the older guy had an unknown power under the question marks. The battle itself then began, and Elmont immediately launched a strike with his aura skill, causing some damage to Leon. The enemy suggested that the guy surrender, because it would be shameful for him to lose to a man without a noble family. However, Leon did not give up and used a large number of his new abilities against Elmont. The opponent immediately called these skills insignificant, and in addition, he hinted at the young man's self-confidence. These words did not please Elsid. He took this insult not only towards his student, but also towards his own training methods. This angered him so much that during the break, He asked the guy to knock out all of his opponent's teeth during the fight. The fight continued, and Leon was able to attack Elmont several times during this time, again relying on his endurance. This further unsettled the older boy, so he again suggested that the young man give in and admit defeat. However, the young man refused, and after that, Elmont used an unknown skill, the ability to always hit the target. The hero quickly realized that he was thus in a hopeless situation. Then the young man changed his tactics and made an unusual accelerated attack from above. This surprised everyone, and the young man also broke his opponent's left arm during this. Elmont became angry at this turn of events and tried to attack his opponent again, and Leon was able to knock out several of his teeth, and thus was able to win the last fight. Elsid was pleased with this result, so he decided to start getting acquainted with a new skill: acceleration. Leon learned that the human body is usually slower at processing information than the mind. This is why, according to Elsid, it most often uses reflexes in dangerous situations. Professional fencers use aura to counter attacks, and with energy comes acceleration. However, Leon was able to use this on his own in the battle with Elmont because he had already overcome the limits of his instincts. He was also very lucky because he only used his hips for acceleration during the fight. If an inexperienced body were to apply this skill to its entire area, it would end tragically for the guy. For the same reason, Elsid advised Leon not to use the newly discovered skill to open and absorb the aura. After the boy's recent battle against Elmont, he became even more famous among the students of his academy. There were also rumors that the nobility used the potion not only to improve their skills, but also for fencing techniques. One day, while walking through the corridors of the academy, Leon unexpectedly met Chloe, who we already knew. She wasn't skipping class. Her lesson was actually cancelled, so the two decided to go outside to talk. Just like Lion, the girl said that she began to notice changes in the once insecure guy. Also, during this conversation, she remembered that there were rumors among the students about a magic sword that Leon supposedly used. However, Chloe noted that she did not believe in them because the last time the great hero's power was seen was too long ago. After these words, the guy burst into tears because for him, Elsid was not just a holy weapon. He truly considered him a true friend who saved him at the most difficult moment of his life. These thoughts made the guy even more determined and confident in his physical strength. And this is exactly how the response scale in the magic system increased, which surprised the spirit of the sword himself. However, in the end, he was pleased with this development and decided to organize really hard training. Evening came, and already in his room, Leon remembered the continuation of the conversation with Chloe. She advised him to meet with Lion and discuss all the worries with him alone. In her opinion, the young men were similar in character, and the older guy only communicated well with his younger opponent. The next day, Leon thought about the fact that the older boy could defeat him, even using the Rodrigo technique. So the young man decided to ask Elsid to show him Lion's characteristics in the magic system for the first time. The hero noticed that his opponent had an advanced level of aura from outside his body. Even the strongest instructors began to master this skill in adulthood, and not all achieved it. Elsid once again reminded that the upcoming battle was important, because the entire direction of Leon's life could depend on it. There were indeed many hopes placed on him, but the sword spirit could not yet speak of them. He eventually promised to do so, but only after the bank had defeated Lion. Meanwhile, we can notice the oldest guy in his room. He spent the entire evening there discussing Leon's improved skills with his advisor. He was amazed that he was able to defeat Elmont, the Count's son who used aura with his own efforts. We also learned that Lion received a notice from the young man before this conversation. In this letter, the enemy declared its readiness for battle as they had agreed. This fight really turned out to be private, and the only spectator was their mutual friend, Chloe. Leon suspected that Lion had chosen her only to prove his much greater and better strength in front of the girl. The guy realized that his opponent really did have the character traits of a person from a royal family. Typically, such a person develops action plans in order to achieve a goal and gain more power. This thought filled the guy with even more confidence in himself and his strength. as well as determination to win this battle. Before starting, Lion swallowed an unknown pill, which he described as an aura suppressant. The guide justified his use by saying that without it, the energy could have appeared in him by accident. Then Leon would have lost either way, which wasn't really that interesting. The battle itself at the beginning was nothing special, just a clash of two swords, without the use of magic or other secret skills. But the enemy's movements were too incomprehensible, and even Leon's Rodrigo technique could not recognize them. Lion's advisor was amazed that those of different origins and with different combat techniques were almost on par. Subsequently, for a second, the guy was able to read the enemy's future movements, but he was wounded with a sword. And then the guy realized that all these movements were actually part of a well-thought-out strategy. All this time, Lion tried to tire out his opponent with quick and mechanical sword actions. However, he was confident that his own method could also bring the young man victory in battle. Leon knew that the enemy would not make any concessions to him in order to eventually make the guy his vassal. Lion, meanwhile, used his new skill, which was called Pure Law. This was the name given to concentrating energy on the muscles in order to thus transfer the force beyond the body. He tried to attack in his new state, but his opponent was able to quickly get his bearings. The young man reacted to this in time and thus received only a minor injury to his arm. Leon noticed that during the Pure Law, Lion didn't even use his aura. Elsid then explained that there are different training methods that can strengthen the body and take strength beyond its limits. The older boy took advantage of his opponent's distraction and swung for a sharp blow. Luckily, he was able to see it in time, and so he eventually repelled the attack with his sword. After this incident, Leon began to bet on his endurance and observation, as he had done before. Both participants were truly unwilling to give up, and they were eager to prove their strength and perseverance to each other. Lion decided to apply his Pure Law again, but his opponent did something unexpected. He was able to break his sword with a special skill that he had developed during his battles with the older boys. Before his fights against Lion, Leon trained with many swords. Therefore, it was not difficult for him to cope with this technique even now. So the young man won, and now he had the opportunity to ask his opponent any question. However, he did not announce his decision immediately, but decided to postpone this moment for later. He just smiled at Lion and suggested that they meet again for a duel. After all these events, Leon, who had an arm injury, was walking along the corridor of the academy. On the way, he met Chloe, who, with the help of her aura skills, was able to heal his wounds. She said she still doesn't understand why the two guys are fighting non-stop. She also suggested that the younger boy was planning to complete his studies at the academy. Leon, to her surprise, confirmed these guesses, but he did not talk to her further on this topic. He did this because, according to him, he himself was not yet sure about his future. Instead, he asked Chloe to visit Lion to take care of his well-being after the defeat. Already alone, Leon told Elsid about his true desire to become a hero, and not one imposed by someone else. The sword spirit supported this idea and added that there was nothing wrong with having your own dreams. In his opinion, the most important thing was hard work and persistence to eventually achieve everything. He also told the boy that it was originally planned that Lion was to become the chosen owner of the Holy Sword. However, the recent battle confirmed that Elsid was not mistaken after all, and it was Leon who had all the necessary qualities. After such confessions, the guy did not feel guilty for taking advantage of someone else's chance. The opposite happened. He understood that the spirit of the sword in the end chose him to achieve its goal. Some time passed after the fight, and Leon was finally officially expelled from his academy. He also learned that his battle against Elmont's team gave impetus to the students from poor families to become stronger. And the guy himself decided to move to Blaine, a city that welcomed adventurers like himself. 6 months had passed since our previous meeting with the heroes, and Leon and Elsid were wandering through the forest to their destination city. At first they wanted to take a shortcut, and so they moved through the thicket. But this turned out to be even more difficult than they thought. In the forest, they were sometimes attacked by goblins, but Leon could easily defend himself against them with the skills he had learned. He called the adventures in the forest a new training from Elsid, and from then on, he wanted more such fights. However, the spirit did not allow him to do this, and explained his choice by the youth's certain inexperience for such fights. After some time, the heroes got out of the forest, found the city itself, and Leon was able to go inside through the gate. Although Leon liked his new surroundings, Elsid spoke rather negatively about Blaine. He kept calling it dirty, and not so unusual for a famous city of adventurers. The guy immediately headed to the local guild to register there as an adventurer. According to him, this way he will be able to do much more work than an ordinary hired person. We also learned that Elsid came to the hero earlier than planned, and therefore the bulk of the powers were sealed. According to the preliminary plan, it was supposed to train its owner's body to a high level of immortality. In exchange for this, the spirit must give him great strength, which would be enough to defeat his enemies. However, plans changed, and now Leon needed to improve his skills so that he could activate and study the aura. The young man registered with the guild and was informed that he would start his journey at rank D. For higher ranks, starting from level B, you must first prove your level of aura usage. The young man noticed that all the members of the guild were representatives of completely different races, united into teams. Elsid was surprised that the once warring groups were now under the same roof and carrying out missions together. And the guy should first accept one task free of charge to prove his ability to work as an adventurer. After some time, Leon found himself under a bridge, where he had already managed to defeat several monsters. During this period, he noticed that this test was a little more difficult for him than it had been before. Elsid explained that before the boy only fought one opponent at a time, and now that he had to advance, he had to learn to pay attention to several enemies during one fight. He immediately understood what was being discussed and returned to his task. He had to defeat the humanoid mice that inhabited the city sewers. During another battle against them, Leon noticed a horn that was not actually native to his species. And the spirit said that most monsters have the ability to evolve by absorbing a large amount of energy. In theory, one would have to be very careful when encountering a humanoid mouse. Indeed, according to Elsid, usually additional body parts give the enemy certain abilities. However, in reality, this monster was of low rank, so it could be easily defeated with sword attacks. After some time, Leon came to the guild with a bag filled with the tails of humanoid mice. Also in a separate package were several unique horns that he had also collected from these monsters. The young man sold his catch and received a lot of coins for it, because the body parts of unique species are quite valuable. With the completion of this task, the young man was able to officially confirm his status as a D-rank adventurer. However, he was told that due to his low status, he was not a priority for most missions. Elsid noticed that the lady at the table considered Leon to be one of the strongest guys. She really could have thought so, because the young man easily agreed to difficult tasks. Indeed, there is a popular saying that a true hero does not reveal his skills right away. According to this belief, he does this when society begins to call him by this title. Perhaps Leon will also become an outstanding guy one day, who will be able to benefit people and will find real pleasure in it. However, the guy didn't want to stay in this city for long and decided to leave it after reaching rank B in the guild. Elsid announced that he would be able to develop training that would improve the boy's skills in just 100 days. At the same time, he relied on an effective result so that it would have the ability to defeat monsters with the strongest level. The guy thought it was impossible, but he was told that heroes can accumulate the power of defeated monsters. Subsequently, they get the opportunity to use it to activate and develop their own aura. Killing humanoid mice in the sewers is really not enough for this skill. Therefore, the spirit of the sword suggested visiting the Titan Mountains, a very dangerous place where Elsid himself could not reach. However, he convinced the guy that it was with the help of his training system that this could be achieved in 6 months. In the guild, Leon had already earned the nickname Cat, due to the fact that he killed humanoid mice in the city's sewers. This time, he was unable to bring back much loot, and he had not seen the enemies themselves as often as before. So he decided to choose something else, and his choice fell on a very old offer from the knights of the city. They offered anyone who wanted to destroy the stone slime that had settled nearby. This species is capable of corroding even the stone walls of castles, so they posed a serious danger to the city. Already at the location of the target, it seemed to the guy that the current task would be simple. But the slime turned out to be not as weak as the young man thought, and began to attack him with stones. Elsid said that his weak point is usually the core, which only needs to be broken to destroy everything. However, rock slime has its own complications. It holds rocks inside the body. Not only is it stored there, but it also surrounds the core, and the enemy attacks by spitting it at the opponent. The slime group, after several hits from Leon, focused their attention on the big attacks. This happened because the enemies could understand that it was impossible to repel their simultaneous attacks. According to Elsid's calculations, Leon would have been able to reach the core only at the moment the stones were spat out. Indeed, it is precisely at such moments that a very convenient hole for this task is formed, into which one can aim for a strike. The most important thing was to be able to approach opponents without affecting the floor, because they feel every vibration. Thus, the guy was still able to overcome the first batch of stone slime. And the sword spirit noticed that during this battle, the foot stance skill in the magic system had improved. Elsid explained that it is important to be able to adapt your balance and fighting postures to any environment. He also advised Leon to stop dodging attacks, and also not to attack first on a group of less than 3 monsters. For 3 weeks, the boy visited the rock slime's habitat every day, and each time he carried out from this place large bags with green remains of monsters. Now that the task was completely completed, Leon could use the energy he had received to activate the aura. Elsid was amazed by the result, because he expected that it would take the guy much longer to accumulate strength. Before the trial itself, he also explained that the nobility receives their aura from birth, and this is what distinguishes its members from people without a rich family who have to get it themselves. Also, as it turned out, not all people had the ability to physically endure all these rituals that had to be experienced. However, the spirit of the sword calmed the guy down and promised that he, but the power he had already accumulated, could protect him from harm. The ritual of activating the aura channels was indeed painful. Then Leon was simultaneously penetrated by 10 swords of light. However, the pain was not in vain. The guy felt a flow of energy in his body, but he was not yet able to use it. Then Elsid said that most often, when the aura is first activated, there is an illusion of unlimited power. Therefore, you need to train even more to be able to really manage your new energy. He also decided to remind the young man of the theory and told him the basic knowledge about the human aura. There are 5 most popular energy attributes in nature, but they are all individual for each person. For Leon, for example, it turned out to be the sun, the highest of all, simultaneously combining the skills of light and fire. Also, with the awakened aura of the guy, some characteristics in the statistics of the magic system changed. At first, the guy was surprised that he had already reached the 3rd level of this skill. However, Elsid explained that he had previously been able to use acceleration and advanced abilities. And also from this moment on, the young man finally had the opportunity to master practical swordsmanship. Leon couldn't wait for this moment, but Elsid said that he began to feel negative energy in the city. However, he was not sure that she would be very active in Blaine anytime soon. Therefore, Leon had to focus on constant training and fighting his enemies. Meanwhile, in the guild, Leon was able to get promoted to rank C thanks to defeating monsters and good recommendations. Immediately after this news, the guy decided to take on another special task and began choosing something from the lists. At first, he wanted to choose something related to the urban wilds, where the greatest crime and poverty reigned. However, such tasks were usually given to mercenaries who had more physical strength and experience. However, Leon soon found an interesting task. He had to explore an abandoned house. He was in a remote area, and mysterious living armor had recently appeared there. Before going on a mission, the young man received a bag from the city's knights, which contained a generous reward for completing the mission. Leon also took advantage of the opportunity and decided to ask the girl at the table about the location of the city church. He argued that he only needed to ask something important there. However, in reality, he wanted to visit the Holy Order, knowing that its members would be able to help him in the future if needed. We were reminded that the guy should hide his identity as a future hero. He did this primarily so that no one could find information about him. On the way home, he and Elsid animatedly discussed the features of the new living armor. After some time, they came to the conclusion that it would not be easy to defeat them in the future. The fact is that such enemies are truly deprived of their own will, and they obey only the one who first charmed them. At first glance, it seemed to everyone that the strategy for defeating the monsters was easy. However, for some reason, no one had yet mastered this armor, and notices about it were still hanging in the guild. Leon suspected that the reason could be the ability to revive from complete destruction after a few minutes. Since the house was in the wilderness, Leon and Elsid eventually had to go through it. During the long journey, the guy constantly felt something unpleasant surrounding him. The sword spirit explained that this was normal, since Leon's solar aura was quite sensitive to the Dark One that various thieves might possess. However, this does not always mean imminent danger, so he urged the boy to continue on his way. Subsequently, the abandoned house itself, where the heroes had to go, came into view. It was dark inside, so Leon was able to light the way with the Holy Sword skill. When everything was surrounded by bright light, the young man quickly came across the purpose of his arrival. One set of living armor held a halberd in its hands, which could be used to inflict precise bruises. Despite this danger, the boy was able to easily tear it apart with his quick attacks. The young man got the impression that the customers had overestimated the power of one set of armor. However, in reality, it turned out that there were several such opponents in this house. Leon still couldn't see the full picture of what was happening in front of him, so he asked Elsid to use the Holy Sword skill again to illuminate the corridor with the enemies. A beam of light suddenly appeared from the sword, briefly blinding the crowd of armor. However, this magic actually had a short-term effect, and it was not possible to defeat them completely. Leon initially wanted to immediately use his Holy Sword skills against the enemies, but Elsid had some doubts about whether this was really living armor, as the customer described it. Indeed, this kind of monster usually couldn't feel pain, but the current enemies screamed in pain when they were blinded by the sword. In addition, the spirit himself noticed the black smoke that surrounded them on all sides, which was also not typical. After some thought, the sword spirit concluded that it was not actually living armor, but phantom armor. These are demonic creatures that were unable to find peace after their death, and since then, they have only hated all living things. There was only one known way to defeat them: to sever all ties with the human world with a powerful magical attack. However, in addition to this, another problem arose for the heroes, namely, a large number of enemies inhabiting the walls of the house. Elsid took into account the nature of the spirits, as well as the number of deaths that had occurred in the city recently. So he assumed that the guy would have to deal with hundreds, if not thousands, of phantom armor. We learned that the evil spirits that comprise the current enemies are of a rather low level. They are not able to move independently over long distances and are confined to only one area. And it was precisely the urban wilderness, where crime and violence prevailed, that proved to be an excellent option for their spread. By the time it became lighter outside, Leon had already managed to overcome many of the phantom armors. Over time, he noticed that he had a limited field of vision, making it difficult to fight enemies behind him. Elsid commented on this observation by noting that there are three groups of people in this context. There are those who are easily controlled by unfamiliar factors, and those who adapt to them. In addition, there are only a few who can turn the surrounding conditions into their strengths. The guy decided that he needed to achieve a better level of skill. This was absolutely necessary, because he decided to encroach on such a dangerous and deceptive environment as the urban wilds. The hero also took into account that there could be traps lying in wait throughout the entire area. They were camouflaged and usually impossible to recognize by their appearance alone. In the meantime, we were introduced to Blaine's strongest and most brutal gang. We were also shown a closer look at the leader of this organization, whom everyone called Khan. At that moment, he listened attentively to his charges, who reported to him about their observations in different areas of the city. One group kept an eye on a house unknown to us and reported to the leader about the information they managed to find. Another team simultaneously examined the water in the sewer and noticed blood there, as well as human remains. After receiving this information, the group leader ordered that all the evidence that the men had be collected. In the future, he planned to pass this information on to the representatives of the Adventurers Guild, or the city church. One member of the group expressed some doubts about the need for immediate action, but the man did not like these words, and so he instantly wounded this rebel. He also pointed out the need for caution in future communications with an organization unknown to us. Khan stressed that they were known to be able to put the city gang at a disadvantage. Another of the gang members told Khan about Leon, who was spotted arriving at an abandoned estate in the city. It became known that he now has a new nickname among the guild members: Cleaner. Indeed, he usually took on old orders that no one had been able to complete before. The leader became intrigued by the boy's abilities and history, and began developing a strategy to use him for his own gain. Meanwhile, Leon himself was practicing his new aura with Elsid, and it turned out to be quite a tiring workout. The sword spirit was amazed at the results the young man had already achieved in training, although the hero himself did not feel any progress. Then he was shown the magic system with updated indicators, but even this still did not surprise him much. Elsid replied that he did indeed see progress because he was quickly mastering skills that others would spend months training to master. However, for Leon, real progress would be mastering the 7-star sword skill. We knew that it was developed by the great hero Rodrigo in his youth. The boy sought to learn at least one level of this technique and combine it with the possession of his holy sword. Unfortunately for him, however, he was unable to start his new training straight away. A city gang we were familiar with had already arrived at his apartment without warning. Leon had already become familiar with it during his recent research into Blaine. Thus, he immediately understood the purpose of their unexpected visit, himself. He agreed to the men's offer to go to Khan, because he realized that he could be of use to him. He also hoped that in the future he would have a chance to use his boss's influence for his own purposes. On the way to his destination, the guy saw an example of the terrible treatment of a stranger by one of the gang members. He was about to intervene and save the man, but Elsid stopped him. The sword spirit noticed that this way one could form a negative impression of oneself. Once he arrived at his destination, Leon was struck by the chaos and bloodstains. He noted that they looked more like deterrents than random marks. Soon, Khan himself arrived in the room, but the guy instinctively grabbed his sword and swung it to strike. This act angered the leader, and he was ready to hit the young man with his fists. But the man finally stopped a few centimeters from his face, but did not attack back. The man explained that he had been watching the guy he had just called to his place for a long time. In this short time, he learned everything about his past as a student who had already achieved a lot in such a short time. He was amazed that a guy without a noble family could fight back against representatives of the upper classes. He also noticed in all his actions the young man's desire to prove his strength and determination to all the representatives of the nobility. The leader finally offered him to perform a certain task for him, and in exchange for this, he offered to fulfill his most cherished wish in the future. Over dinner, Khan explained that problems had been arising for 3 months due to a secret organization of heretics. Because of their actions, more and more people die, and their souls subsequently become demonic armor. They were defeated by a rich man named Simon, a mysterious killer nicknamed the Undertaker, and finally by Khan himself. One day, a massacre took place in 2 districts of the city with the participation of this organization, as a result of which 200 residents died. Simon then decided to send 500 mercenaries to investigate the problem, but they also died. That is why Khan, as another head of this district, approached Leon with a request to help him. However, he suspected the intention of involving the Adventurers Guild in this matter by using the guy himself, and refused. Then the man decided to show the young man additional evidence in the form of certain documents. They confirmed the fact that an unknown force was involved in the increased mortality in the wilds of Blaine. The guy then realized how terrible the situation was, with people disappearing from the blind areas. It is precisely because of this isolation from the rest of the city that the authorities do not pay attention to these events. Convinced that this situation really needed a solution, Leon agreed to help. He was to explore the area, and Khan gave him a large bag containing a new sword and various scrolls for the journey. The blade of the sword had a gang symbol on it, which could be used to gain access to criminal areas. And the scrolls in the bag were magical, but it was not yet known what kind of magic might be encrypted there. Leon quickly realized that he would need an extra assistant for this task. For him, this was a man who was focused primarily on the mission and not on the benefit that could be derived from it. So the next day, I went to look for people in the city church, which just happened to be in the neighboring area. Indeed, priests cannot be bribed with ordinary needs, so they can be found in poor neighborhoods. The guy decided to visit the bishop and felt his aura begin to react to the unknown person behind the door. And then, at the threshold, he was politely congratulated by the cleric himself, from the elven race, whose name was Jezer. It really no longer struck him that strangers became embarrassed when they learned of the bishop's origins. At the time of the meeting, the elf already knew everything about Leon's previous achievements and blamed them on society. So he sincerely thanked him for the help he had already provided to the people of Blaine. However, after telling the story of the situation, he began to doubt the veracity of the words on the documents that the guy gave him. He also failed to recommend a candidate with all the necessary criteria for the assistant role. Therefore, the bishop proposed an alternative solution to the problem that had arisen. He finally agreed to join the young man in his future adventures in the wilds. At first, Leon doubted his skills, but the bishop responded by showing his hand. There were many scars on her that could only have been left by long-term use of magical energy. It turned out that Jezer was skilled in the use of fire aura, and his advanced skills had the ability to burn everything around him. We were also told that it used to belong to one of the most famous and powerful knightly orders. However, the elf grew old over time, and therefore he was no longer as agile as in the past. Leon nevertheless agreed to take it with him, and went outside to wait, while the bishop took something for the journey. He expected that since his ally was of elven descent, he would bring lighter weapons, such as a bow and arrow. However, in reality, Jezer carried out of the church a large mace on chains, which he could easily control. In the evening, Leon went into the city wilds for further exploration of the area. The bishop was watching him from behind at this time, wearing clothes of an inconspicuous cut, so that none of the strangers would recognize him. The boy noticed that only he was able to sense the presence of his new companion with his aura. Elsid explained that one of the advanced skills of the aura is the ability to become invisible to the eyes of strangers. Leon was only able to sense the bishop because they had opposite aura attributes. Indeed, for the guy it was the energy of the sun, and for the new acquaintance it was the energy of the moon. The walk passed without incident, and subsequently both reached the entrance to one of the areas of the city where there were more heretics. There were many bandits inside, but they did not attack Leon because he was holding a sword with the gang's seal in his hands. The boy and the bishop entered the secret place of the sewer organization and did not expect any fines. However, they found a hole in the ceiling, and through it they overheard a conversation between two heretics. In the upper room, they talked about a certain ceremony for which 70 people were supposedly already killed. The young man had not yet had time to process the information, and Jezer had already punched an even larger hole from above. Thus, he penetrated into the room with the heretics and was able to confuse everyone gathered. He also attacked the participants in the dialogue and caught one of the most unharmed ones in order to strike him. The enemy had a special sword with him that blocked any blows. With confidence, the man was already ready to attack the bishop himself. However, Jezer was saved by Leon, who was easily able to strike the heretic several times with his sword. We also learned that Elsid used special magic before going into the city wilds. With it, he disguised the holy sword as an ordinary one, which could not be identified. The team hadn't learned much information about the heretics yet, so they decided to go inside one of the rooms. There, Leon saw the remains of people who had already been killed for the ceremony lying on the floor, and he wanted to pass by. And the spirit of the sword said that heroes do not forget about tragedies, because such events are something that they will now have to live with forever. And the enemy is not only something final, but also problems that people have to fight with every day. Real heroes make the world a better place every day, and never stop doing it, even when the tasks are small. The guy, meanwhile, realized that it would be difficult to move around in an environment he had never been in before. The thing was that Leon had no information about the location of all the rooms and the presence of the heretics. Therefore, the young man was able to use one of the magic scrolls that Khan gave him for the journey. It was thanks to this magic that he was able to see a much wider range of the surrounding space. It worked, and thanks to this spell, Leon was able to see the location of different rooms and groups of heretics. However, this skill also had a strange side effect. A little blood flowed from his nose. Fortunately, it didn't last very long and didn't have any significant consequences. After Jezer had reviewed all the information, he expressed his thoughts. He was more doubtful about whether there could be additional traps in this area. However, the guy decided to check this place now, because he was not sure if they would get such an opportunity again. After some time, the team managed to capture several heretics, and they were subsequently able to reach the sealed room. It seemed that there was no way to get inside, because there wasn't even a door handle. On the walls, one could only see symbols written in a dark red color that looked like blood. The bishop first tried to break down the wall with his magic mace, but he failed to carry out his plan because the weapon simply recoiled and still did not penetrate anything. Elsid suggested that it might have been the material it was built from. He suggested that non-standard material was used in construction. Each type has its own unique properties, and nothing can destroy it, not even physical strength or advanced magic. The bishop then tried to use his holy powers to open the room. However, after using them, only a small crack appeared on the wall, which was unable to break through the entrance. Leon decided to attack with the holy sword, which was completely imbued with solar aura. After this, the door to the magic room did not self-destruct, but, fortunately, disappeared completely. This left a perfectly smooth passage through which the heroes were able to enter. In the center of the room, the team noticed a strange monster, consisting of many living clots of flesh. The sword spirit said that this monster is called the City Devourer, because of its ability to destroy entire settlements. It can usually be summoned through an incredibly large number of human sacrifices. It seems that the heretics plan to use the monster to destroy Blaine, but the ritual itself is difficult. Moreover, there were no measures yet in place that the church could come up with to prevent the catastrophe. But Elsid already had a plan. He wanted to organize a real war in order to defeat the organization with Leon at its head. Subsequently, the young man and the bishop were noticed by all the other heretics, and so they had to quickly flee from that place. Fortunately, they managed to take with them one of the monster's clots, which could have been important evidence. Jezer immediately realized that he would not be able to ask for help from other members of the city church. He believed that none of the ministers would have time to cause significant damage. However, Leon already had his own plan of action, and he told it to the bishop when they were already in a safe place. The strategy described by the young man was simple: immediate mobilization of the population. He wanted to invite free adventurers and able-bodied residents to re-enter this territory. However, the pressing question was whether Blaine would have enough people to fight back. Then the guy suggested bringing in people from the slums, like Khan, because he considered them no worse than officially hired fighters. First of all, Leon and Jezer headed to the already famous Adventurers Guild, where they were immediately invited to meet with her head. The negotiations proceeded smoothly thanks to the presence of the bishop, the evidence presented, and the information received about the situation. To solve the problem, the team was recommended to seek help from one of the high-ranking adventurers. He was the only person they could send, because everyone else had already completed their tasks. The meeting with Khan's gang also ended well, mainly due to Jezer's contribution to the negotiations. Also noteworthy is his threats to the leader and serial killer we might remember as the Undertaker. After 2 days, Leon's team easily managed to gather a large number of warriors for their final mission. Near the area, there was an army of newcomers and professionals, specialists, and people completely far removed from this sphere. At the same time, a strategy for the placement of all participants in the duel was developed. The strongest fighters will stand in front, while people with weaker skills will attack from afar. Also joining the fighters were the Knight Kondrat, the already known to us Undertaker, and an energetic adventurer named Karen. The attack began quickly with multiple fire arrows being launched towards the entrance to the area. Then the opponents decided to release one of the monsters as a diversionary tactic. Also, the passage inside was blocked by a magical tornado, which did not disappear even after using aura and physical attacks. Leon was able to dispel it with a holy sword attack with a large amount of energy. A hole appeared at the site of the tornado, through which the young man's closest allies were able to enter. While they were exploring the hidden tunnels, Karen noticed a passage that could lead to an underground room. Everyone else immediately began to doubt whether this could not be one of many traps. However, the adults still decided to come here because there was no other route they could take. As the team descended the stairs, all participants suddenly found themselves in a secluded space that resembled a labyrinth. However, they were scattered across different parts of it, so the main task was to quickly find all the allies. While wandering around the place, Leon met Karen, who seemed to not be there alone. She was found with the Undertaker, who stood gloomily behind her all the time, like a shadow. The girl was not taken in by all the problems and traps, and she resolutely led everyone along with her. While wandering through the labyrinth, the team noticed 3 heretics who looked stronger than those the boy had fought before. Karen noticed his confident expression and decided to tease him. She immediately invited him to have a small speed competition. We were shown that her aura skill allows her to attach her body to walls and ceilings. The site was like Velcro, and the girl could quickly and easily cover long distances. Her movements did not go unnoticed by the members of the organization, but they were first struck with daggers and then tied with ropes. Leon also encountered one of the enemies, who, unlike the others, was not unarmed. He did not attack with a sword or a mace, but only by throwing balls with sharp spikes at the enemy. However, the guy remembered a similar experience with stone slime, and was able to easily cut the thorns into pieces. And even later, he was able to cut the enemy into 2 parts in this way, and won the victory. Karen, who had already defeated her enemies, was pleased with the young man's results. However, Leon was alarmed by the cuts she made on her enemies. They were too similar to her own. Then he asked the girl to show her characteristics in the magic system. Thus, he discovered that she had been the Undertaker all along, a murderer whose true identity no one knew. The boy understood that he now had to be careful in his constant presence. Indeed, he did not know what would happen to him in the future if he revealed that he knew her secret. The team then encountered another monster and realized that they could all be a cover. It looked like the heretics wanted to distract the team from awakening the full power of the city devourer. However, it was no longer possible to bypass the current threat, so they, albeit reluctantly, had to engage in combat with the enemy. This time, Leon's strikes with the holy sword couldn't cause much damage to such a monster no matter how hard he tried. Then Undertaker was able to help him, performing a special attack in the meantime. After this, it was no longer possible for the enemy to regenerate, and so the adventurers won once again. Later, during the exploration of the labyrinth, the team was able to reach one of the passages. There were already 8 members of the enemy organization there who had not yet noticed the team. Leon of Karen would not be able to defeat this group of people anyway, so they decided to look for their allies. The guy sensed traces of a possible battle that was nearby, and so he decided to go in that direction. To determine the route, the girl was able to use her extrasensory skill, and so the adventurers moved forward. However, they were unable to arrive in time. They saw a seriously wounded Kondrat outside the door. There was another group of heretics nearby, and several corpses of those whom the knight had managed to kill before. And, as luck would have it, Leon had already been noticed by one member of the organization who immediately moved towards him for a duel. Karen was even less fortunate because she was surrounded not by one lone heretic, but by two united heretics at once. The enemy immediately used a unique blue fog skill on the young man. It has become known that it not only surrounds the enemy, but also kills after physical contact with him. Elsid explained that this organization has two categories of members. Mutants, for example, who are able to modify their bodies. There are also sorcerers who have the ability to create streams of energy or various objects using magic. However, Leon did not feel any imminent threat to himself in this unusual environment. He was able to easily dispel this fog with his solar aura skills. The sorcerer, of course, could not accept that his energy could be overcome so easily, so he used another of his spells to create his own assistant to distract the boy. This, to his surprise, did not help him either, and the guy was able to destroy it just as easily. In addition, after this, he decided to inflict several fatal blows on the man. Karen, meanwhile, was also able to defeat all of her enemies very quickly, and in this composition, they headed towards the wounded Conrad. The knight croaked that he could probably hold out for about an hour with such wounds. Then Leon decided to use a special healing spell, and all of Conrad's wounds instantly healed. The knight, like other residents of the city, was amazed by this level of mastery of magic. Therefore, he was sure that the young man should become someone majestic, for example, a cardinal in the church. Although Conrad didn't have enough energy for fights, he was really grateful to Leon. He felt relieved because he had the opportunity to survive and regain his strength on his own. Karen was also amazed by the guy's skills and asked him to tell her the secrets of success, to which he refused. The girl was surprised by this turn of events because she was used to a completely different attitude. According to her, usually everyone fulfilled any of her requests, but she did not question him. The adventurers continued their search and eventually found all the remaining members of the team, who, fortunately, were safe and sound. Once everyone was reunited, they were able to develop a strategy for future fights against the heretics. For example, the bishop will stand in front as the most resistant to demonic energy of all. Leon, on the other hand, will stay behind to protect his other allies and be the team's trump card in the most difficult moments. Undertaker was also placed next to him because he had already proven that his energy magic would come in handy during fights. On the way, the team saw a portal filled with an unknown dark energy. All its members immediately moved there because the heroes could not go to any other place. So everyone ended up with the largest group of heretics, among whom was their leader. The preacher immediately noticed all the warriors present and instantly called his charges to him. Indeed, in addition to individual types of heretics, this organization also has its own hierarchy. The obedient use alien techniques, the believers are consumed by demonic power, and the preacher is the equivalent of a bishop. It turned out that the team, unfortunately, arrived to the main members of the heretics late. By that time, enough sacrifices had already been made to summon the devourer of cities into this world. Elsid told Leon that summoning this monster was similar to regular fishing. It is unknown when the absorber will grab the improvised bait in the form of the life forces of the dead. Jezer immediately decided to use one of the holy goddess's spells to try to contain the demonic forces. While the other team members fought the heretics, Leon decided to get to the ritual center on his own. He wanted to destroy it in order to stop the summoning of the monster. However, the preacher immediately noticed, and after that decided to try to detain the young man. He then used his inferior powers to create a new enemy that would distract the boy. Meanwhile, the other team members realized that no physical or magical force could penetrate their enemies. They later came to the conclusion that the organization had decided to bet on endless battle. The heretics hoped that this would delay the team and prevent them from completing the planned ritual, and they succeeded in doing this. There were signals that the devourer of cities responded to the sacrifice of heretics. Leon first considered whether he should have just attacked with his sword right away, but Elsid suggested first creating favorable conditions to deliver a successful blow. He advised Leon to use one of the very first spells of the holy goddess. Thus, in combination with the previous magic of Jezer, it was possible to create a special space. These magics were known as sanctuary, and they had the ability to repel any kind of demonic energy. The preacher was not happy with this development and used magic to increase his size. Indeed, with Leon's current aura skills, the effect of sanctuary was not that long-lasting. It wouldn't be able to stop all the enemies at once, so it was easy to take advantage of. The heretic was immediately able to wound all of the guy's allies with one blow, and Leon himself remained unharmed. However, the young man realized that using the full power of the Holy Sword against him would be too risky. So he approached Karen and offered her the use of his magical teleportation powers. The guy told her that in this way, he planned to get the opportunity to enter the magic circle. The girl didn't yet know that he already knew her secret, so she pretended that she didn't understand what he was talking about. Then Leon told her that he already knew everything about her double life, and after that, Karen reluctantly agreed to help. With the help of her special shadow walk technique, the guy was able to easily reach the place where the ritual was taking place. However, he did not have time to do anything there, because he was suddenly inflicted with almost fatal wounds by the preacher's large thorns. It seemed that the young man would really die now, without having fulfilled his current goal of exploring the Titan Mountains. However, before his planned death, he remembered another meeting that took place in his life. He saw a memory with his friend Lion, to whom he promised, before parting, to meet again for battle. Surprisingly, he did not die after this, and his eyes shone very brightly at that moment. It seemed that at that moment he had no will of his own, but was actually being controlled by Elsid. It seems he temporarily decided to control the guy's body, as he was dying, to help him cope with the crisis. Once the body was able to stand up, the sword spirit opened access to the Silver Chariot's spell network and the movements of the Big Dipper technique. He was able to perform the first attack, which was capable of causing severe damage to the surprised preacher. This was not enough to overcome him, so a blow from another spell deprived him of rapid regeneration. The desperate enemy, as a last attempt to win, created a special portal between dimensions. At that moment, he was furious with the young man and tried to drag Leon into space to certain death. However, the last combat skill quickly destroyed the core that was required for the ritual to summon the city devourer, and the already haggard preacher himself found himself in the field of action of the newly created portal. He tried to escape, but they managed to drag him inside, and thus he died. The whole team moved towards the wounded boy, and the bishop quickly healed his severe wounds. However, despite all his efforts, he fainted due to the large amount of energy used. At the same time, the space around the fighters began to collapse as its creator died. However, the team did not despair, and all members were able to leave the area before morning, when all the enemies had already been defeated. We were later shown the spirit of the sword itself, who discussed all the events of the past battle against the preacher. He did this with the holy goddess, and his temporary control over Leon's body was mentioned. It turned out that with such a desperate act, Elsid violated all the rules specified for his limited powers. This was not done by chance, but by the will of the spirit of the sword, although it was forced by the situation that had arisen. The holy goddess understood the necessity of keeping the young man alive, but there were also rules. She did place some restrictions on Elsid, but we are not yet told what exactly that meant. Leon later woke up alone in the guild's infirmary, but noticed that the spirit was not flying around as it usually did. Instead, a recorded message from the creature itself appeared from his palm. The hologram noted that the guy and the spirit could no longer meet for a month. This was marked by a fine from the holy goddess, and he explained that it was done after breaking the rules during the battle. However, Elsid did not lose hope for Leon's future development, and believed that he could become even better without his guidance. So he decided to give the young man a specific task to complete within that period of time. The boy had to independently train 3 of the Big Dipper's combat techniques that had already been introduced to him. After seeing the message, Jezer came to Leon's room with food. The bishop briefly told the young man what had happened to the city after the previous battle against the heretics. According to him, 3 days had passed since the battle against monsters and people and Leon's loss of consciousness. The city devourer was finally destroyed, but there were casualties. There were both dead and wounded soldiers. Although Jezer thanked Leon for saving Blaine, the boy himself did not feel he took full credit. He added that it was truly a result of the work of all team members who contributed during the matches. The bishop then told him that he found the young man's great physical strength and ability to control his aura suspicious, and the last battle using powerful magical techniques confirmed his assumption. Now he had no doubt that Rodrigo's power was involved, but the chances of that were slim. Despite Elsid's disappearance, Leon still had the ability to pull out the holy sword from his palm. Thus, Jezer was able to see this weapon with his own eyes and be convinced of the guy's strength. The bishop immediately promised that he would not tell this secret to any other person. However, he had to inform the new heir of the holy goddess's powers, whose inauguration was still ongoing. Soon, Karen also entered the room, but Leon felt uncomfortable being around her because he remembered her secret. It turned out that the bishop had guessed this too, because his aura was sensitive to everything that stood in the way of communication. In addition, during the fights at the heretic base, he noticed how the girl used special aura techniques. According to him, they certainly did not resemble the usual methods of adventurers, even high-ranking ones. However, the bishop added that he saw Karen that day only as a brave fighter who was an indispensable member of this team. He later asked the girl to tell him and Leon her side of the story. At this point, everyone was interested to know how she came to such a dangerous lifestyle. Karen eventually shared her own biography. She had been an orphan since childhood. She had mixed human and elf genes, and the girl spent her entire childhood in the inhospitable wilds of Blaine. One day, she was accidentally found by the man who was the one training children like Karen to become serial killers. Thanks to her genetics, the girl was able to quickly and efficiently complete several orders, for which she received the title of Undertaker. With her new skills, she quickly rose up the system's hierarchy, and after some time, the girl was just one step away from the title of local boss. The previous holder of this title was actually not difficult to kill even for a lower-level holder. Thus, Karen herself became one of the leaders of the city's slums, albeit under the guise of a mysterious killer. However, over time, she realized that she no longer enjoyed brutal murders as much as she had before. Therefore, the girl subsequently released all the children who had to go through the same thing as she did. And then she decided to become an adventurer in order to whiten herself in this way. After such a confession, it was difficult to determine the final sentence for Karen. Then, Jezer entrusted such a choice to Leon, who immediately decided to show the girl his holy sword. We are not shown the consequences of this action, but it became known that Leon decided to leave the Adventurers Guild. After such a task, he was offered rank A and a meeting with one of the lords, but he resolutely refused everything. Karen believed that great opportunities and recognition from the entire nation had now been missed. Leon countered, adding that such popularity could also attract the attention of other hostile groups. The guy himself could not yet fight and use aura skills on his own, without the borrowed powers of the Holy Sword. As it turned out, after showing the magical weapon, the young man offered Karen to become one of his partners, and she had time to think. She said that her choice was primarily influenced by her social status in the past. She was also driven by the desire to avoid a similar fate for many other children in the future. Thus, she finally agreed to help Leon in all his future heroic adventures until the end of her life. We were also told about Khan's fate. He immediately disappeared after the battle against the heretics. Despite all the help in the duel, he risked receiving severe punishment for all the actions of the past. Karen immediately asked Leon about his own plans for the future. But, unfortunately, he could not yet tell her a precise answer to this difficult question. For now, he understood that his main task was to find a place where he could live and train at the same time. Therefore, the guy immediately moved with the adventurer to one of the areas of Blaine, where the ministers of the church usually lived. There he trained with Karen, who, although she noticed shortcomings in technique, was pleasantly surprised by individual skills. For example, Leon could distinguish the original from a copy created by cloning technology. But he wasn't so successful in his orientation, when a multitude of mirages of the girl appeared on the field. The boy realized that his skills weren't as strong as Karen's, even though he had many advantages in space. The girl noted that he really has well-developed attention and observation skills, which does not allow him to be deceived. Although it was a good skill, Leon was not incapable of confusing his opponents on his own. What he lacked more was creativity and his own fighting techniques, because his entire arsenal was typical. However, Karen was ready to help him with this, and she began to teach him various ways of realizing the aura outward. She said that aura training is different for each person, and it most often depends on her own attribute. Also, due to these characteristics, the difficulty of training also differs. For example, it was easy for Karen herself to achieve this, but Leon had a very rare attribute, which makes the whole job even more difficult. Leon was given a small task to try to visualize his aura attribute. After some time, he managed to create a small clot of solar energy. Karen praised him for his performance and reminded him of the importance of consistency in achieving high results. At that time, Jezer came to visit his friends and told everyone about an interesting event. It was the inauguration of the current successor to the powers of the Holy Goddess, which took place in the mountainous area and was coming to an end. In this same place, they introduced me to the girl herself, who had the name Elahan and was the 8th owner of the role. There were rumors that she already had greater power than the previous chosen one, so a lot of hope was placed on her. According to legend, the first feast accompanied the hero Rodrigo, but was not able to fight on its own, only to heal. This is why the Iron Castle was created, a hiding place for one of the strongest fighting groups on the continent. There is currently only one test left for Elahan to complete before she can achieve her new status. She was escorted to one of the sacred mountains, and it was worth making her mark on it, as the other girls did. The girl already knew about the current great hero, Rodrigo's successor, Leon, and his noble deeds for the people of Blaine. So she decisively struck the mountain, expressing her great devotion to him and her desire to fight side by side. The young man himself, after reading her letter with the desire to meet, felt a certain envy. Indeed, he already understood then that he was clearly not as strong and agile as the new holidays. The guy very quickly focused on his task of forming an aura image. Although it was considered too personal a topic, Leon asked Jezer what he did when such a need arose. The bishop said that he creates in his imagination the phases of the moon, changing depending on the power he has already used. Leon immediately realized that the sun did not change states like other cosmic objects. He suddenly came up with a plan to reproduce the phenomenon of a solar eclipse using his aura. To test his theory about the possibility of combining images, he decided to challenge Jezer to a training duel. Despite the powerful blows of the magic mace, the guy was still able to concentrate on his created idea in time. He was able to independently perform one of the Big Dipper techniques by visualizing a solar eclipse above himself. The young man understood that his technique was not yet perfect enough for frequent use, but he was more pleased that he had his own unique technique for duels. He was also visited by the girl who usually organized all the tasks in the Blaine Guild. She brought the young man a generous gift from one of the counts, a bracelet, which was not simple. He actually had the ability to store various items inside himself for future use. Karen showed that she had earrings that, although smaller, had the same functionality. It was these that she used to store her daggers inside during duels. The boy was told how to use the bracelet and was able to place another gift inside. Indeed, in addition to this, the guest herself gave the young man a small jar of tonic solution. It was also revealed that Leon already had all the conditions to reach the B rank of an adventurer, but he couldn't achieve it right away, and he still needed to demonstrate his aura weapon to the guild girl. In response, he was able to show his sword, imbued with magical energy, and thus he confirmed his new status. The girl from the guild also reported that she had recently received a task regarding a trade caravan. He had just stopped briefly in Blaine and was planning to head towards the Titan Mountains, where Leon wanted to go. However, there was only one free seat, because at the time of the order, Karen was not yet on the team. That's why Leon didn't go there now, but asked to be informed if there were any changes in the availability of places in the future. While he waited for a response from the guild, Karen continued to train his new sense of aura through duels. The girl had much greater speed than Leon could perceive with his own eyes, and that was why he always lost to her. Then the girl advised him not to focus during battles not only on his vision, but also on other external factors. Then the boy closed his eyes, and he noticed the slight movements of the wind and the step of Karen's boots on the ground. This gave him the opportunity, even in such a vulnerable state, to deliver an accurate blow to the enemy. Just during the intense training, the adventurer's friend, the bishop, came to visit them. He reported that he had already managed to organize a meeting with the chairman of the trade caravan already known to us. He, fortunately, very conveniently placed his camp not far from the place of residence of the adventurers. That was why Leon and Karen immediately headed in that direction for the planned meeting. The boy met the head of the caravan, and the first thing he noticed about him were the deep wounds on his arm. Thus, he quickly concluded that it could be related to his long-term work as a scribe. The leader was initially unable to allocate another place for Karen inside the caravan due to the insufficient budget of his own guild. Then he proved to him that the girl would really be useful during the ascent to the Titan Mountains and in everyday troubles. Karen was paid B rank for her stay inside the caravan because she was merely accompanying Leon. Inside the tent, the boy had the opportunity to see for the first time the people who worked as mercenaries. It has long been known that they are usually partial to adventurers. That's why Karen immediately warned that one must be very careful with them. Leon was sad to say goodbye to Blaine because in a short time he had already experienced many adventures and met new friends. However, he also wanted to prove to himself that he could become stronger without Elsid's constant presence by his side. Before setting off, the team went to visit Jezer, who blessed the boy and girl for a successful journey. He also decided to give Leon a special necklace for the journey that could heal from damage. It also made it possible to summon the nearest knights of the Order of the Iron Castle. This was a one-time feature, so it was worth waiting for a better moment to use it. Already on the way, the adventurers were surprised by the royal attitude towards them from the guild. For breakfast, they were immediately served a sumptuous banquet with a large number of meat dishes. The caravan itself moved quickly, and Karen explained this by a special spell. It was able to reduce the noticeable weight of the body, but its durability suffered. That is why it is used only now to climb the mountains themselves, because there are no smooth roads in their territory. Later it began to get dark, and so the guild arranged a temporary halt. This way the team had the opportunity to relax and prepare dinner for everyone. Leon at this time got out of his truck to take a walk in the open air, and his partner decided at this time to take a little nap inside. On the street, the guy was immediately met by nearby mercenary guilds. They were unhappy that a young man without much experience was already treating them so condescendingly. Karen intervened in this conversation and suggested having a fair fight to determine the strongest. While Leon was worried, the girl organized a campaign with bets on each fighter. Thus, everyone, even the guild leader, was able to vote for their favorite for a symbolic fee. Before the fight began, Karen, who was the referee, quickly announced the rules. The use of foreign objects, unknown weapons, and going beyond the field were prohibited. Leon's opponent decided to use a shield that appeared to be ordinary during the fight, but it was truly magical and infused with a small amount of magical substance. He could withstand any counterattacks from the enemy, and so the boy realized that he could not attack in the way he was accustomed to. Instead, he used physical kick attacks and then used the techniques he learned from training with Karen. After the young man's victory, several mercenaries also wanted to compete against him. However, they were immediately stopped by the commander of the mercenary guild, named Gustav. He, surprisingly, bowed and asked Leon for forgiveness on behalf of his entire team. He admitted that they, like everyone else, initially did not believe in his physical strength and aura skills. In fact, everyone envied the abilities of the guy who could fight on the same level as experienced mercenaries at such an age. All this time they felt a debt to the young man, but he repeated that he did not consider it necessary to receive retribution. After this, The mercenaries invited Leon to drink alcoholic beverages with them in the evening. Of course, it was fun, but the young man was not resistant to the effects of these liquids and subsequently fell asleep due to a hangover. Over time, friendship with the mercenaries, surprisingly, brought the guy certain advantages. For example, men taught how to fight the orcs that inhabited the Titan Mountains in large herds. They also told him stories about the monsters they encountered during their adventures and how to defeat them. However, they did not leave the young man alone and asked about his relationship with Karen. They always didn't believe that they were riding in the same caravan as partners only. Leon tried to prove his point and said that he really didn't have any feelings for the girl. But no one believed it yet, and everyone thought that he was hiding behind the skirt of a strong adventuress. One day, while walking on the street, the boy met Commander Gustav and, out of curiosity, invited him to a duel. The man was surprised that the young man did not directly parry his blows during the fight. He took the brunt of it all the time, which wasn't typical for most amateur fighters. He added at the end that he would really be interested in competing with Leon again. Meanwhile, the guild reported that it was already entering the forest, where a large number of different monsters lived. However, not all of them usually attack a caravan of such small size. This is mostly done by medium-sized monsters, such as trolls. During this evening, Gustav was able to tell Leon a lot of new information about their fighting skills and external characteristics. The guy was already in full combat readiness when the trucks entered the forest. And in Karen's opinion, all the monsters would appear on the horizon only the next day, so she advised going to bed. Suddenly, at night, the entire trading caravan was surrounded by a large group of wild goblins. Since Leon already had experience with them, he and the mercenaries went into battle. The guy began to notice a completely different tactic for conducting fights among the mercenaries. They did not rely on personal qualities, but took advantage of the advantages and disadvantages of their own allies. At first, the guy couldn't find his place in the fighter's placement scheme for a long time. Therefore, he only got in the way, irritated the other mercenaries, and got under their feet. However, later he began to find certain gaps in space, which he easily filled. This is how he helped men in battles against forest goblins. After quickly defeating all the monsters, Gustav asked Leon not to return to his tent. He really wanted to discuss his plans with him about hunting the wild troll. He invited him to go with him into the deeper corners of the forest, to search, but without Karen. The thing was that these monsters usually run away as soon as they see someone of high rank. However, the girl herself was later also offered to go on this expedition. She agreed only on the condition that the guy could face at least one troll one-on-one. So the guild stayed in the forest for 4 more days, and during this time, the mercenaries and adventurers managed to defeat many monsters. However, they did not even complete half of the indicated route, despite all the spells and destruction of obstacles. One night, during a halt, a mysterious stone fell from the sky onto the caravan. He managed to crush to death 3 people who were watching him from the street. This frightened the others present, because no one knew from which direction the next boulder might come. Leon began to think about the strategy for finding the stones and the trajectory of his flight. He planned to counter these unexpected attacks with his eclipse skill as much as possible. However, Gustav had already arrived to help the guy, and he was able to cut one of the boulders with his giant sword. All these sounds of attacks and falls subsequently attracted the attention of many different monsters, who began to rapidly advance towards the caravan. However, the main priority for Leon and Karen was the goblins, so the adventurers independently moved towards their cluster. The girl had already managed to easily defeat several monsters, and the guy, during his search, came across his only enemy. He decided, as he had done during their previous duels, to blind him with his holy sword skill. However, this did not produce the effective result that Leon expected to see. This did not bother the enemy at all, and he began to attack without thinking, and guided only by his own instincts. In addition, he could quickly regenerate after damage, and in a short time of battle against the young man, he had already restored his vision. The boy was also amazed by the weapon the goblin used during the fight. He had a large wooden stick that could inflict severe bruises. However, Leon did not give up, and continued to attack the monster with his usual techniques in order to tire it out first. And then, with concentration, he used his eclipse skill to destroy his opponent. However, the troll remained alive even after this and was able to fight, and the guy got angry because of this. This is how he was able to use one of the Big Dipper's skills for the first time to deliver the truly finishing blow. He later realized that this technique really did require a lot of aura. That's why the guy wasn't able to use it several times in a row in battles. Karen, who had been standing nearby the whole time, had already managed to congratulate the young man on such a brilliant victory over the goblin. However, Leon also quickly fainted due to using too much power during the fight. In his dream, the boy saw Lion's face and remembered why he was constantly training. He always wanted to become even stronger than the eldest student of his former academy. The young man woke up in the morning. He was alone and lying in the back of the caravan. He immediately tried to get up, but he couldn't do it so quickly. It was for just such occasions that he had necklaces that Bishop Jezer had given him before his journey. He used it instantly, and thus Leon was able to easily restore his own powers. A joyful Karen arrived in the back of his truck and told him that the battle with various monsters in the forest had ended well. Most of them died, and those who remained and ran into the thicket will not bother them anymore, because they already know how it can end. The girl was also able to lead the young man out of the caravan and brought him to a distant place in the forest. There lay all the remains of the wild trolls who had already died after yesterday's battle. She said that their heads could, in theory, be sold for a high price because they were valuable for creating solutions. However, they were not in perfect condition and did not contain the blood that was important to buyers. That is why getting a large sum of money for them was no longer as possible as in the best-case scenario. The head of the guild came to them and said that there were dead and injured from the previous battle. But there was no need to worry about them. They would be looked after in the best possible way in time. Also, for the trolls killed in the forest, Leon of Carden was given an additional monetary reward. But Karen, surprisingly, refused her half, despite all the persuasion. The reason was simple. She believed, as she had in childhood, that such generosity would eventually have to be repaid with her own strength. On the way back to his tent, Leon met Commander Gustav on the street. He was very glad that everything was fine with the young man, and he felt much better. The guy immediately asked the man about the well-being of his dead brothers. The commander himself noted that in this guild, inevitable death had long been a common occurrence. Everyone had resigned themselves to the fact that they might die during this expedition, and some even made wills. So there is no need to feel guilty about losing your teammates, even if you really regret that they are gone. And Karen added that grief over someone else's death only prevents you from moving on. And it worked, even if you were already an experienced hero and had gotten used to everything. She also told Leon about the next location that the caravan would have to pass through. It was the desert. It was quite a complex ecosystem. Everything was covered with a lot of sand. It was hot outside, and the desert was also inhabited by various monsters with which the nomads coexist. However, according to Karen, the caravan will not have to move there for very long, so there shouldn't be many problems. Leon was glad that Elsid would have returned by then, because he had already missed him during his travels. After some time, the guild finally managed to leave the vast territory of the wild forest. She entered the desert itself and then set up a temporary camp there. While all the other travelers were relaxing outside, Leon was looking for a map in the back of his truck, which was obviously well hidden. However, just at that moment, the already familiar Elsid appeared from the inactive sword. He instantly found himself in front of the astonished boy, as he had done before, to the penalty. Leon was first of all scared by this development of events because the sword spirit appeared so unexpectedly. He immediately said that he had time to regret that he had missed his appearance for so long. Elsid was surprised by this attitude towards himself, and therefore took offense at the young man. During his youth, a mentor was to be treated with respect, although Rodrigo himself had none. Leon quickly told the spirit of the sword about all the interesting adventures and new friends that had happened during his absence. What was most surprising was that the former serial killer was the young man's partner. However, Leon managed to convince him that Karen could indeed be trusted. He considered her a good member of the team, helping with various tasks and training the young man. Still, Elsid was most interested in whether the boy's physical and magical characteristics had improved over this long period of time. They inspected the updated system together and saw that Leon's skills had reached an even higher level than Lion's. At first, the sword spirit couldn't believe that the guy had managed to achieve such mastery of skills in such a short period of time. However, he was most amazed by the fact that Leon had already mastered one of the Big Dipper's techniques to near perfection. And he noted that this happened because Elsid was able to show him the performance while he was directing his body. During the long journey of the caravan, the spirit of the sword at first could not understand for a long time why they were all in the desert. Leon tried to explain to him that it was along the caravan route, and that this way they would be able to reach the Titan Mountains. However, it turned out that Elsid had something completely different in mind. According to him, there used to be green plains in this place, and for him, changing the space and climate to a desert was purely physically impossible. The spirit of the sword was sure that this place could have been artificially changed into a desert during its 300 years of absence. However, he advised Leon not to dwell on these thoughts and to focus his attention on what he was traveling for. During the long journey, Leon became happier than he had been reunited with the spirit of his sword. Karen complained about the constant heat and therefore did not understand the reason for the guy's joy. Elsid spent the entire ride silently looking at the places in the desert that he had seen in his youth as dense plains and meadows. However, he realized that he had already lived his time a long time ago, and now the main thing was how Leon himself would remember these places. It was time for a break, and the mercenary crew treated the adventurers to plates of fresh stew for dinner. At night, the guy slept peacefully after the journey, and suddenly he was woken up by an excited Karen. She told him that she felt some kind of foreign presence on the street. It didn't seem to be anything deadly, but it moved quite quickly under the sand, from which we can conclude that the enemy's goal was to steal something from the caravan. At first, Leon was skeptical about awakening other mercenaries, and Elsid convinced him that this would be the best solution for protecting valuables. According to Karen, she sensed about 14 unknown objects moving rapidly around the bodies. There were 22 more people nearby who guarded the place from attacks by the caravan owners. Once outside, the girl was able to throw her sharp daggers into the thick sand, and thus was able to detect enemies. Subsequently, all the other mercenaries were awakened by the noise and immediately rushed to the attack when they saw that the enemies were stealing their things. The opponents tried to run away immediately, but Karen had already run after them to prevent them from escaping with the stolen cargo. The girl tried to throw her dagger again, but one of the men was able to stop it with just one hand. Leon was hesitant about whether he should use his Big Dipper skills now. His enemies seemed too ordinary to use this technique on. Elsid said that it is normal to doubt something because you should only do what you decide for yourself. Indeed, generally accepted standards of pure good and evil have long existed in society. But in reality, it is impossible to choose for whom the most correct choice for a given situation is. Already at the meeting, the head of the guild began to discuss the issue of theft of things. He never understood why the enemies decided to do this to his caravan. And Karen added that they were lucky that the enemy team went to the caravans together. Indeed, in this way, it was easy to recognize them and understand what their intentions were. This is how the adventurers were given the task of finding this group of enemies again and returning all the stolen items back to the trucks. Some mercenaries said that tracking itself would not be as easy for them. According to them, the desert sands are capable of erasing with the wind all traces of other people's presence. However, the girl remembered that one of the enemies was able to grab her dagger, and that is how he ended up with an aura mark. With the help of Karen's abilities, it will be easy to track him down and find the enemy base. She decided to take Leon and one of the mercenaries with her, and the head gave her a special compass for the journey. It was set up to find the caravan's cargo and react to it. On the street, Karen was able to quickly find the dagger mark using her aura skill, and so she quickly moved in that direction to find the right place. Subsequently, the girl was able to find an amazing valley, which did not exist before, following the aura's trail. According to Elsid, it could have been created artificially 100 years ago. Most likely, it was because of the existence of this valley that the fresh plain suddenly turned into a dry desert. This place used to be a great center of vitality for green areas and meadows. However, due to the new artificially created valley, the ecosystem was destroyed, and so new conditions appeared in this area. It seemed that the enemies had once found this solitary place, and since then, it had become their base and hiding place. After some time, the team was able to reach the headquarters gates, where 2 guards were already present. Leon was still hesitant about whether or not to use his attack on them and kill them all. At that moment, he felt that this way, he would not become better than an ordinary bloodthirsty killer. The team overheard a conversation where the guards were discussing all the stories and attacks that had happened to them recently. Among them was a case when they attacked a family of nomads together, and at the request of the parents, they left only the son alive. However, it seems that the child's fate will not be so joyful in the future after the tragedy. They mocked the fact that the son, finding himself without parents in a hot environment, would still die. These words angered Leon, and he still decided to use his obscuration skill on these people. After this easy victory, the team was able to easily enter the kidnapper's base. The battle line was led by Karen this time, who was able to kill all nearby enemies very quickly and effectively. The compass subsequently began to react to the cargo, and Karen decided to use her shadow skills to enter inside. The girl left Leon and the mercenary to keep watch over any enemies that might be nearby. Meanwhile, the thieves disappeared because they could not open the caravan chests containing valuables. While they were talking, they didn't notice how the door opened with an explosion, and a team of adventurers came out from there, along with Trunar. The enemies immediately realized that the adventurers who attacked them were quite dangerous. Indeed, they were able to enter the protected base without physical damage. They were about to run away quickly, but Karen recognized one of the enemies, whose name was Mole. At first, the man did not understand how his opponents knew his name, but then he recognized the killer himself. Karen quickly, without any hint of redemption, dealt the man several attacks that left him with many wounds. Crete realized in time that he would not be able to withstand a duel against the enraged killer. However, he still could not understand why she was still offended. It seems he was already familiar with Karen due to her past as a child, learning to be a serial killer. According to him, thanks to this experience, the girl did not die in the urban wilds, but acquired many useful skills. The girl explained that she never wanted such a past, to become a killer or to gain great power. For now, she lives the way she always wanted, namely, as a free person. The mole had not yet had the chance to be forgiven as she had, so that he could change his ways and whitewash the sins of the past. Subsequently, after much deliberation, she allowed him to survive and did not finish off her husband. The girl ordered him to find her later, when he had already regained all his strength. Karen and Leon were able to take the stolen chests with them and were planning to return to the caravans. However, the man suddenly found the headquarters self-destruct button and decided to press it. He eventually gave the entire team of adventurers the opportunity to escape, while he himself remained in his place. The valley itself was gradually destroyed by earthquakes, and subsequently, nothing remained of it. Morning came and the team was able to arrive safely at the caravans, holding their found cargo in their hands. Leon and Elsid, of course, were sorry that they were never able to find out anything about the history of the creation of the artificial valley. However, the Sword Spirit noted that they would not have been able to learn anything new for themselves in any case. Thus, the caravan was able to reach the city, which was located inside the desert itself and was called Barcasa, in full complement. It was a border town, ruled not by a count, as was usually the case, but by a marquis, and there was also an independent army there. The caravan had to stop for 3 days to replenish its supplies before the journey. Leon and Karen were able to do whatever they wanted in the city during this time. Also, one of the best rooms has already been reserved especially for adventurers. It was located in a city hotel, and there was even a double bed inside. The boy immediately realized what freedom in such conditions could lead to, so he looked away in shame and disappeared. The guild leader didn't understand at first why the boy saw some kind of problem here, so he wanted to offer Karen a separate room, but she refused. The girl found herself alone and wondered whether she would be able to be with Leon on a permanent basis. At that moment, she was troubled by doubts because she did not know whether the guy would find someone in the future who could replace her. Therefore, in this city, she sought to prove to herself and the young man that she was worthy of him keeping her on his team. Meanwhile, Elsid watched Leon, who was still blaming him for the recent situation. Indeed, now he will not only have to walk next to Karen, but also sleep with her in the same bed. The head of the guild himself later returned to him, still not understanding the urgent problem here. The husband offered the guy to also give him a separate room, but he, like Karen, refused. He also asked the man about the cargo that he and the girl were so eager to return. The head was initially reluctant to reveal more details about its contents, calling it a secret. He was later told that inside one of the chests there was a special black crystal that was very valuable. It was brought by a trade caravan on behalf of one of the lords who they had yet to encounter on their way. This man had a dubious reputation, and everyone considered him very cruel. Therefore, returning this crystal to the city was important for preserving the life of the entire guild. Evening came and Leon could not find Karen anywhere in the city, but she conveniently left a note in the room saying that she would be back soon. Gustav, taking advantage of this opportunity, decided to invite the guy to the city tavern. Meanwhile, Karen decided to ask the locals about the presence of the most dangerous local gang. She was looking for the one who usually deals with smuggling and selling things on the black market. It turned out to be a well-known organization of traders, popularly known as OWL. It is rumored to be financially supported by the Marquise, as its members occupy important positions in the government. The girl was able to get to the organization's headquarters at the specified address. She also remembered a conversation with Leon, where she explained to him all the secrets of the secret groups. As it turns out, secret organizations use methods that can be used to transmit messages. Karen, for example, was a member of the Spider Team, and they had their own methods. In order to exchange messages, it was necessary to visit a funeral home, and then the person wishing to do so had to place the entire contents of his request in a special coffin. Typically, organizations don't bother so much with information sharing. More often than not, they use optical illusions to hide, as the owl did. However, Karen had been to this place before, and so she was able to easily bypass it through the illusory door. She walked inside the headquarters itself, but her movements did not go unnoticed. The girl came here to buy information from people about the fiefdom of one of the counts, Reuben. However, the man set a high price for this knowledge, 800 gold coins. Karen decided to ask if it was possible to give her a discount. She offered her own information in exchange, and the price dropped by 100 gold coins. The girl was not satisfied with this discount either, so she revealed the identity of the man standing behind the counter. As it turned out, it was indeed one of the butlers of the Marquise of the city of Barcasa. He realized that he was facing an influential person and was afraid that he would be able to sell information about him. That's why he agreed to lower the price for knowledge about the count, and Karen paid 260 coins. In the town tavern, Gustav, along with the other mercenaries, encouraged Leon to drink his alcoholic drink to the bottom. The lady at the bar asked them where they were going to go, and it turned out to be Reuben's already familiar fiefdom. The girl was surprised after these words, since lately people have been avoiding this place. This happened due to rumors that a real vampire had recently arrived in this city. This is a creature with high intelligence, possessing various magical abilities and immortality. They are also capable of drinking human blood, and not all of them survive encounters with these monsters. Leon was delighted by these words, and he could not wait to meet them. But he did not know what was better, to exterminate them all, or to try to resolve the situation through peaceful negotiations. According to Elsid, there were few vampires left during his youth, and he killed most of them with his own hands. Leon realized that he had to decide for himself what was evil and what was good. So from that moment on, he decided to see everything first and get information. Meanwhile, a general from another mercenary gang entered inside, and his name was Jerome. He expressed dissatisfaction with the fact that Gustav's team had taken over the entire area of the tavern and did not want to leave it just like that. In this case, it was decided that all members of their gangs would go out onto the street near the building. This was done in order to organize a duel between two generals, one against the other. Elsid and the other mercenaries said that this was all quite common because the men would settle the matter by force. It became known that Jerome himself had openly feuded with Gustav before, and this was not new. But it was this time that a stranger challenged a man we knew to a public fight for the first time. It seemed frivolous, since Jerome's skills are not at a high level and he is facing a losing opponent. However, it is not known why the man felt incredible confidence that evening that he would eventually win. The battle began, and Jerome used a special sword to attack, with which he was able to inflict several wounds. However, the enemy himself did not give up so quickly after his first fall. In response, he used the skills of his steel attribute aura, and Jerome used the hydrogen attribute. Leon's friend did not want to continue the duel, because according to the rules, one of the duelists must die. But Jerome suddenly changed his appearance, and then instantly disappeared from sight. True, his presence was hidden from the spectators of the fight only for a short time. The man attacked Gustav from above, thus causing him even more injuries. He was already lying on the ground, and Jerome's assistants also changed their appearance and moved towards the weakened body. Elsid realized what was going on, and asked Leon to illuminate the mercenaries with the holy sword. This subsequently blinded the men, and, amazingly, they began to crumble instantly. It turned out that they were no longer ordinary men, but dhampirs. It was a cross between living humans and immortal vampires. They become stronger at night, but can be overcome with a silver weapon and a solar attribute aura. Jerome revealed that he did not act of his own free will, but was the root of evil that controlled him and his fellows. He named Count Reuben, whose city was just the next stop of the trading caravan. After these confessions, Leon's thoughts were already focused on various theories about the Count's intentions. Later, the young man was reminded once about the existence of his shared room with Karen, to which he blushed. And the girl returned from her night reconnaissance in time, and instantly appeared before him. She planned to tell the guy about what she had learned during this time, that a vampire had appeared in Reuben's city. However, Leon had known this for a long time from rumors and stories, so he was no longer so surprised. The next day, he was already discussing the situation that had arisen that day with the chairman of the trade caravan. And next to the adventurers at this time, Gustav was already completely healthy. Of course, the mercenary guild and all the members of the caravan were in trouble. While they were resting, a vampire lived in the neighboring fief of Reuben, and dhampirs could also walk around the city. However, the adventurers knew about this before they entered these lands, so they could prepare thoroughly. The head of the caravan thought about the black crystal, which he was entrusted to deliver to Count Reuben. Indeed, if the team had failed to retrieve their cargo, there would have been an excuse not to enter the city. However, if the caravan does not arrive with the crystal, the Count will perceive this as a terrible disrespect. Therefore, the team had no choice but to visit Reuben's city, despite the threats. After the meeting, Leona called Karen to her place to talk to him alone. She was convinced that the Count had sent thieves specifically to take the chests containing the black diamond. Indeed, with such an artifact, his secret could be revealed, and this would damage Reuben's reputation, so he could get the crystal and carry out his plans alone, without anyone knowing about it. However, be that as it may, the adventurers were still able to return the cargo, and the caravan headed to the border with the city. This is why, in Karen's opinion, the entire guild and the Count himself found themselves in an awkward and dangerous position. Meanwhile, in the city of Reuben itself, one of the vampires, who looked like a young guy, was talking in an apartment with an advisor. We were told that the boys' clan had long ago been wiped off the face of the human world. Thus, among the vampires, Only the guy himself and his trusted man remained. From now on, his main goal in life became the revival of his family, which he discussed with his interlocutor. However, over time, thanks to his connection of entities, he saw the events that happened in Barcasa with Jerome. This is how he learned about the existence of Leon, who was able to neutralize them with the help of light. The boy guessed that he also knew about vampires and suspected that the young man might be a member of the church. On the way to the city, Elsid told Leon his story about how he used to kill vampires in his youth. The guy didn't like this version of events because he had already heard all these life stories many times. The road to the fief itself turned out to be too safe for a terrifying city. There were no external threats, and the caravan reached the city gates without any problems. All the guild members noticed that there was a special magical barrier in front of the entrance. According to his bodyguards, he did not allow vampires or other creatures into the city. This now meant that no monster or vampire either could enter this territory and live there. On the streets themselves, there was also a complete absence of inhuman creatures and even their hybrids. Entry into the Count's castle was only permitted to the guild chairman, as well as adventurers and mercenaries of high rank. The situation in the fiefdom looked more and more strange each time everyone entered inside. All the bodyguards and staff were human, and even Count Reuben himself was not a vampire as everyone thought. Leon doubted whether all these rumors from other cities were actually lies. However, Count Reuben himself told the guests that hidden vampires really do live in his city. No one could find them through his own security, so the man suggested that the guests hunt these monsters. In the evening, the whole team began to discuss this proposal from the Count. It seemed rather strange to everyone that they were also placed in special rooms for respected persons. Thus, all members of the team had the impression that the guards and the Count himself were trying to keep an eye on them. Elsid also told the guy that the Count was indeed a very powerful magician. He was the one who set up magical protection against vampires in his city. But it would be very easy for him to make this protection destroy all the vampires at once. So it was unclear why he decided to use the help of a small guild. Leon knew that he couldn't share his doubts with his other allies, as that would reveal the spirit of the sword. That is why he subsequently told about his suspicions only to Karen, who, as we remember, already knew about the holy weapon. It was time for bed, and Leon had already entered his secluded room to prepare for the night. Suddenly, Karen entered his room and unexpectedly pushed him onto the bed. She looked at him with a strange look and assumed a provocative pose, as if she was about to kiss him. A mysterious spy was watching these events on the street, and he saw this spectacle. The husband blushed with shame because of what he had experienced and immediately disappeared from that place. However, in reality, all the actions were not performed by people, but only by shadows created by the girl. She expected that everyone would definitely be watched by people from the Count's entourage, even at night. She also suggested that Leon go on a reconnaissance mission through the city streets on his own. Indeed, the spies would not suspect them now after having witnessed the night scene. The partners explored the city for a long time, but they could not see any signs of life. Instead of residents, only guards with different types of anti-vampire weapons walked the streets. Even after what he saw, the guy still couldn't understand the Count's relationship with vampires. Therefore, Elsid assumed that they could be neither enemies nor allies. Indeed, the entire caravan immediately drew conclusions about their bad attitude, without looking into the situation in more detail. There were no signs of people from the poor class in the wilds, which surprised Leon of Karen. However, the adventurers later came across several vampires, one of whom was named Tepes. To the surprise of the people, they did not immediately engage in open battle. Unexpectedly, the new arrivals decided to conduct a truly diplomatic dialogue with the adventurers. Tepes accepted Leon as a member of the church because he had previously seen his solar powers. The young man nervously confirmed these assumptions, although he knew that they were false. This is how the adventurers got a lot of valuable information about Reuben from the vampires. They shared these facts with the Merchant Guild the very next day, when it became lighter. It turned out that the Count really does give all the poor people to the fief as sacrifices for the monsters. He also tries with all his might to keep any random travelers out of the city. At first, Gustav did not believe these facts, but later, the vampire himself appeared in the room. He said that he had a special body that was not exposed to the sun, as is usually the case. He showed everyone documentary evidence that confirmed that the vampire clan had not served the city church for a long time. 300 years ago, some of the vampires joined the Demon King and were destroyed by the great hero Rodrigo. The rest of them were protected by the town priest, who offered them service in the church in exchange for freedom. When this contract expired, the vampires decided to find shelter. That's how they ended up in Reuben's city. But the Count betrayed them and began to do terrible things to them. After the new information, a plan began to emerge in the guild to counter the Count's plans in this situation. Leon remembered the beads from Jezer and used them to send a message to the knights. However, he did not know in advance when help from the Order of the Iron Castle would come to the guild. But it was needed, because even strong vampires can do nothing against a prepared wizard. Therefore, it was worth gradually gaining the Count's trust and weakening his powers while waiting for his blessing. However, there was an immediate problem in this regard. There were guards all over the city, monitoring every step. It was then decided to just pretend that the team was hunting vampires in good faith. At night it was worthwhile to fight demonstratively against monsters, not for real, but to create an image. At the same time, it was worth creating commotion and disorder in order to confuse Reuben. During the exploration of the fiefdom territory, it became clear that strange towers were located throughout the city area. It has been suggested that they actually serve as components for a magic circle. Therefore, it was also desirable to destroy them in order to implement his plan against the Count. But this had to be done in such a way that no one could suspect that the damage was intentional. Also, in battles with vampires, it was no longer possible to use one's own aura. Indeed, such attacks can harm them and make things worse for the monsters. The whole strategy sounded absurd. It was worth competing on the level with vampires without using magical skills. And at the same time, it was worth accidentally destroying magic points in order to weaken the Count's powers. Thus, 6 days passed in the city, and during this time the Count's power weakened in the implementation of his plan. Also, one of the knights of the Order of the Iron Castle responded to Leon's request for help. Then the stranger arranged a meeting for the adventurer in one of the city's restaurants. The guy and Karen arrived at the destination together, but there was a guard at the entrance. The adventurers created the image of a romantic couple for the waiters to avoid possible persecution. In a specially prepared room in the restaurant, the adventurers met 2 people. At the table sat the knight himself, Demian, and a girl in a mask named Angelica. The new acquaintance, as it turned out, did not have the ability to speak at all, so it was the knight who conducted all the communication. He said that he was already familiar with Tepes, since his clan had previously organized volunteer activities in the city. From Demian's story, it became known that the Count had imprisoned almost all living vampires. He planned to feed them people and then use his magic to drain their life force. Usually, such radical actions can lead to the death of the monsters themselves. However, the Count seemed to be indifferent to this, and his main goal was to obtain magical energy from them. Angelica silently classified this situation as a threat level 3, which was one of the highest. The city devourer that Leon had defeated earlier already fell into this category. Therefore, it was finally decided to invite Reuben for interrogation in order to find out from him all his motives and to overcome the Count. And Angelica, together with Tepes, headed to the prison, where other damaged vampires were already located. The building itself was surrounded by a special barrier that does not let in and releases monsters. However, the girl was able to easily destroy him with her physical technique. Meanwhile, Leon's team, the strongest mercenaries, and Demian confidently moved towards the Count's estate as night fell. All those gathered immediately got down to business and asked Reuben about all the facts and assumptions he had obtained. He, of course, did not deny the accusations of illegal actions he had heard against him, but at the same time he promised that all the guests present would die at his hands in terrible agony. The Count immediately broke the necklace, which ultimately gave him a lot of demonic power. According to Elsid, this energy certainly could not have been obtained from blood alone. After gaining more energy, Reuben threw Gustav into a wall with his new power, causing heavy damage. The Count admitted that he did not understand why the Church forbade the absorption of powers from the blood of vampires and sacrifices. He believed that in this way it would be possible to achieve heights of physical strength that had not yet been sufficiently explored. To try to reduce his power, Leon advised Damien to cast a special spell. Together they hoped to thus invoke the blessing of the Holy Goddess to help. However, this unfortunately did not help weaken him as much as they thought. The Count sent a stream of energy at the mercenaries, which they tried to protect themselves from with a shield. This did not save them completely, but suddenly an unexpected breakthrough occurred. One of the archers shot an arrow into the eye, destroying one of Reuben's magic rings. This loss of power angered him, and he began to create demonic assistants with the help of magic. He wanted to weaken the team, which was determined to win in this way and subsequently kill it. None of the techniques or skills worked, so Leon suggested using the dazzling ability of his sword. However, Elsid did not support this idea because no one knew what other artifacts the Count owned. There was a chance he would use the extra magic in the future, but wasting the aura now would be risky. At such a difficult moment, Karen came to the rescue, who was able to limit the rapid movement of the creatures with the help of shadows. Damien also cast another special spell that imbued all weapons with a holy aura attribute. Even Leon's sword, which already had this characteristic, received an additional boost. Also at this time, Gustav had already managed to restore his strength, and he quickly sent the team to the upcoming battle. With this power upgrade, the team was able to overcome the monsters, and they were able to fully focus on Rubenov. And the Count, in response, used another tactic of his: demonic energy flows. They instantly turned his servants and guards into mindless monsters that attacked the guests. According to the new strategy, Damien, the mercenaries, and Leon had to fight against the monsters. And nearby, Karen faced the Count himself one-on-one in her own duel. Leon could not cope with his only enemy for a long time and did not know what to do. Then Elsid advised him to fight against several opponents at the same time. Indeed, mindless monsters usually fight using skills they have already learned. Therefore, in this case, it becomes possible to find their weak points in order to deliver decisive blows later. Leon then remembered the holy attribute of his sword and used it to attack. He managed to neutralize the enemy's demonic powers, and so the guy was finally able to defeat him. After this, Reuben's second ring also disappeared, and then he showed another of his trump cards. It turned out that he had already caught and tied up the wounded Karen with his ropes a long time ago. The Count immediately offered Leon an interesting agreement as the person with the greatest potential. If he joins his enemy and defeats the other members of his team, he will release Karen. And if the young man refuses to help him, then he, according to this agreement, will subsequently kill him. At first he wanted to agree, and then betray the Count and use the Ursa Major technique to win. However, Elsid advised him not to do so because this technique had not yet been studied to the perfect level to be used. Moreover, most likely, this consent would be supported by a special contract or prohibition. These factors reduced the possibility of betraying the Count to zero, so the plan would not have worked. Then Angelica, who possessed incredible physical strength, came from the ceiling to help the team. She easily defeated several monsters using her special Golden Fist move. Leon noticed that she was using a powerful but dangerous aura technique. Using it requires incredible precision and mental endurance to avoid dying. Thanks to her large amount of energy and precise skills, she was also able to break through several magic circles. All the team members, after all the victories, politely asked Reuben to surrender peacefully. Indeed, all his trump cards, rings, monsters, and magic circles had already been destroyed. The Count did not give up, and he in turn pointed once more to the bound body of what he thought was Karen. But instead of her, there was only the shadow of a girl, who in turn quickly disappeared. The girl herself escaped from her place and was able to join Leon again. She later explained to him that in the middle of the battle, she was able to quickly switch places with Undertaker. Then Reuben showed his wounded hand, where there should have been another ring with powers. However, the adventurer took it while escaping from prison, so she was unable to use it. And the last straw for the Count was the arrival of Tepesh and his assistant. They, too, urged him to finally surrender, and everyone thought that victory would come later. However, he grabbed the black crystal, ate it, and then attacked everyone gathered with a sound wave. Reuben now looked much younger and had full vampire strength. That's why he proclaimed himself the new king of all vampires under the red moon. Angelica immediately tried to carry out her attack, but she was quickly neutralized by new demonic skills. Suddenly, large red drops, similar to blood, began to fall from the sky. When they came into contact together, they created a colossal explosion of energy that engulfed the entire room. Almost all of the team members were seriously injured after a major surge of strength. However, Leon could still barely move, and he immediately walked up to Karen. The girl didn't want him to start fighting again because she was very worried about him. The young man asked the girl to send Tepesh and his assistant to a safe place. He himself looked confidently at Reuben and invited him to a duel with the sincere belief that he would win this time. The vampire just laughed when he saw Karen's teleportation with his own eyes. Indeed, with his new powers, he is able to sense everyone's movements and therefore could easily find the girl. Leon's patience ran out at this point, and he used the light of his holy sword. Thus, all the wounds of the allies were healed, and the young man himself decisively attacked the Lord. Elsid added that it's not just about strength, but also about whether you know how to use it. And Reuben, having received new skills, could not use them at all, and therefore lost them quickly. All the allies already felt the restoration of vital energy and foresaw a quick victory. However, the barely living skeleton of the Count was able to bite the guy painfully on the neck. We were moved to Karen, who ordered Tepesh and his assistant to sit in this place. She didn't allow them to go to Leon's aid because it would hinder him. However, no matter how hard he tried, the guy could not remain motionless in this room. He suddenly felt some familiar energy and indistinct screams behind the door. In the next room, behind a large cage, there was a strange creature. It did not resemble a vampire or dhampir in appearance and was dying. When the vampire tried to touch the prisoner, he was able to notice pieces of his memories. But they could not give clear information about this person and her past. And the previous bite on Leon's neck did not cause any serious consequences. This part of the body was protected by a solar aura, as was the head, which took a significant part of the enemy's strength. However, the Count's skeleton remained alive and attacked the guy again with a sound wave. Thus, he threw the guy a long distance away from himself. Elsid explained that the Vampire King had 3 powers from different clans: blood control, sound waves, and magical shadows. As it turned out, the power of blood did not affect the young man, and he only carried away the sound property with his solar aura. Therefore, for the final victory, it was necessary to deprive him of his magical shadows. However, this is not such an easy task, because Reuben already knew that he could be killed with one blow. Then, he won't let the guy get close enough to do it. Leon attacked him several times, using the acceleration skills he had mastered during his training with Karen. However, the Count did not die after this, but with the help of magic, created a cocoon of red matter and closed himself in it. From there, streams of energy suddenly began to appear, reaching even the city's residents. Connecting with people, they quickly began to take blood from their necks. So Reuben wanted to regain his previous form and strength, and he almost succeeded in doing so. After this, Leon concentrated and was able to use one of the Big Dipper's moves to deliver the finishing blow. Before the Count's death, we were shown his story of ordinary life before he changed. When he was an ordinary man, he had a child whom he loved very much. But one day, a tragedy occurred. His daughter became seriously ill, and there was no chance of recovery. In a desperate attempt to cure her, he began to study the possession of demonic spells. The Count subsequently tested his discoveries on the townspeople and, later on, his own daughter. It was she who was found by Tepesh and Karen in prison, holding her favorite stuffed toy in her hands. She also kept calling for her dad, hoping that he would come back. However, with his upcoming plans to take over the world, Reuben forgot that he was doing it for a noble purpose. He died with this consciousness, and Tepes added that vampires usually do not have a separated soul and body. So when their physical form dies, the spiritual one also disappears along with it. Meanwhile, Leon was lying on the ground in an exhausted state, and Demian and Angelica were already trying to heal him. And this happened despite the fact that the guy himself constantly refused all their acts of care. The knight said that the battle against Reuben made him realize the boy's full strength. He also understood the importance of keeping the hero's identity a secret. That's why he promised to do it before the right moment together with his partner. The rest of the team felt relieved that they had defeated the Count. Karen was only angry at the young man because he went to fight Reuben and almost died. However, Leon was unable to defend himself in any way because he quickly fainted due to lack of physical strength. The royal family had already learned of the incident in Reuben's city, and it initially put them in a difficult position. However, vampires and the human prisoners used to feed them have shown their evidence. During a meeting with members of the nobility, Demian described the situation as if it was he and his assistant who executed Count Reuben, and he called adventurers and mercenaries only insignificant auxiliary support in this matter. Karen explained the whole situation to Leon, who had already woken up by that time. Meanwhile, the trade caravan had already left the city and moved on along the indicated route. The mercenaries were glad that none of them were hurt during the fight. The girl herself received physical injuries to her abdomen, but they were not fatal enough to cause concern. The girl also asked Leon for forgiveness for not warning him about all her plans. She promised not to do this again in the future, and to report everything ahead of time. However, the guy didn't see any problem with this, but was upset only because he didn't understand her intentions. Elsid believed that one should reveal all one's intentions, even to one's closest friends. He explained this by saying that in this way, one can turn one's strengths into weaknesses. Now, with all the major stops behind them, the trade caravan headed to the Titan Mountains. There were rumors that there was a physical legacy left behind by the great hero Rodrigo 300 years ago. However, neither Leon nor Elsid himself knew how to find it and get inside. They could also expect danger in the form of a large number of obstacles that could happen to them. The guy himself was determined and believed that first of all one should believe in one's own strength and in the sacred sword. At the very mountains there was a secluded town called Chinook. It was known primarily for the fact that there was no order or leadership there. This is why there was a lot of crime among the population in this area. We were introduced to Odin, a man who held an A rank in the system. He treated the stranger who happened to cross his path with complete unceremoniousness. He, as expected, lost to a much stronger and more powerful man. Therefore, Odin announced to his charges that dinner at the city tavern would now be at his expense. We also noticed a group of people surrounding a seemingly small and defenseless girl. Grown men already expected that it could be easily used for their own pleasure. However, they were instantly hit by a blast of magical energy, and we were now able to recognize the figure. It was indeed Elahan, the new heir to the powers of the holy goddess that we already knew about. Leon and Karen had already reached the Titan Mountains, and they had spotted representatives of the Wyverns. They were a type of dragon, and were dangerous even for ranked fighters. The adventurers were very worried because the place was too dangerous for people. However, there were a lot of valuable substances and metals in the mountains, so there were a lot of adventurers. They came here despite all the dangers, and often did not return alive. Elsid himself was not as excited as the adventurers, but even the opposite. He was very happy because he considered this place a great opportunity to practice. Meanwhile, Elahan used her magical skills to kill all the criminals near her. The man who survived was very surprised after this sight. All these people had incredible physical strength and were influential, and they were killed by a weak girl, in his opinion. The Aerys herself later noticed him and therefore immediately moved towards him. She recognized her husband and wanted to instantly kill him for all his sins, as she had all the other people before him. It turned out to be the Khan we already knew, who had only recently arrived in this town. He wanted to avoid all persecution from the residents of his native Blaine in this way. The husband admitted his terrible actions in the past and said that he received gratitude from the Holy Church after the battle with the heretics. During the conversation between Elihan and Khan, the man noticed one of the seemingly dead guys. But surprisingly, he remained alive even after fatal injuries. The girl explained to him that she used a special spell at the moment of the blow. It holds a person's damaged bones together so that he does not die. Only later did Khan come to the realization of her identity as the heir to the powers of the holy goddess. The girl herself immediately decided to ask the man about his knowledge of Leon's location. However, he himself began to speak about him in a not very good light. Therefore, the offended girl already wanted to inflict the same fatal injuries on him. However, she decided to pardon him, asking Khan to find the whereabouts of the young man. She also asked him to show her the way to her husband's soulmate, Blaine. Elihan grabbed Khan's back without any effort and began to pull him in the right direction. Meanwhile, in the Titan Mountains, two tall men could be seen. They were able to kill one of the dragons, albeit with some physical damage. Now, with the experience they had gained, they were going to shoot one of the drakes. This was the name given to the highest-level dragons, which were intelligent and capable of delivering powerful attacks. Leon and Karen also noticed the fight, and the girl called the men giants. And the guy noticed that the surrounded dragon did not try to attack any of the hunters seriously. Elsid explained this by saying that the drakes were aware of their own advantages, and therefore they were indifferent to such battles. Also, such dragons have excellent visibility, so he seemed to have already noticed the presence of adventurers. Therefore, it was speculated that he planned to attack them next, after he overcame the two hunters. The men were already confident that victory was on their side. However, the dragon instantly threw them to the ground, causing them quite severe damage. The hunters were already sure that they would die from their wounds. But after that, Leon and Karen immediately moved to help the giants. The boy used one of the Big Dipper's skills against the dragon, and Karen attacked the dragon with her daggers, but it did not kill him, despite the wounds. Now again, the team was filled with even greater determination and the intention to defeat the drake. Leon tried to use his own technique to predict the enemy's movements, but he quickly noticed that the world had lost its colors and time had stopped. Elsid explained this by the fact that in such a case, a person's consciousness does not adapt to the reaction of his own body. Therefore, you should not despair yet, but rather take advantage of this opportunity. After all, you can find places where you can hit with your aura. The monster itself, at first glance, had no weak spots, so the young man decided to attack the wing membranes and eyeballs. Meanwhile, the other team members were still trying to deal with the dragon. However, he was too fast, so people couldn't keep up with his attacks. Luckily, Leon was able to warn everyone in time about when to dodge to avoid the most damage. Suddenly, the dragon himself stopped perceiving all events as jokingly as before. Moreover, the atmosphere around the place changed to a more depressing one. Karen also became more serious, and in addition, her determination increased. She then instantly attacked the dragon with her daggers and shadow skills. She hit them right in the dragon's eyes, which weakened him significantly. This gave others an example of where to aim during subsequent attacks. While the hunters and Leon were trying to strike, the drake spat out a spell from his mouth that surrounded the area in darkness. The young man was very worried that he could not find any of his partners, and Elsid calmed him down and gave him the incentive to use one of the Big Dipper's tricks to light the way. However, we were not told what happened immediately after this, and we were able to see Leon much later. He woke up in the morning, lying on a bed in a place still unknown to us. Karen was also lying next to him, taking unusual positions and asking the guy ambiguous questions. She later revealed that after Leon's decisive attack, the dragon, surprisingly, did not die. Instead, he began to move rapidly in different directions, releasing streams of fire, and subsequently disappeared. The guy himself began to fall quickly from a great height and almost died. However, the girl, without thinking, moved towards the place surrounded by flames to save him. Leon was grateful to Karen for such an act, but suddenly giants entered their room. We met them before, and they immediately left when they saw the adventurers together. The girl said that she had managed to meet men. One was called Urga, and the other Julu. Leon himself also introduced himself to these hunters, and he realized how small his size was. Urga and Julu agreed to accompany Leon on a visit to the head of this village. Although they advised him to rest a little more after the fight, the young man refused. In the village of adventurers, it was not only the large size of the buildings that surprised them. They noticed the dead bodies of dangerous monsters that were usually capable of destroying large areas. And Elsid explained that giants actually have incredible physical strength due to their height and muscles. Urga and Julu, already familiar to us, showed Leon and Karen the way to the training area where the head of the village was located. It looked like a large dragon's mouth, and suddenly sparks of fire appeared from it. From there came out a tall woman with big muscles, whom everyone called Balkania. The adventurers were very scared by her presence because of her pumped-up body, and the villagers began to worship her as if she were a goddess. Balkania immediately realized that Leon was looking for the legacy of the great hero Rodrigo. However, she could not give away information about its location just like that. She immediately organized a large-scale event in the training area. There, the boy had to fight several giants in order to get what he wanted so much. The first opponent was named Ghoul, and he, like the boy himself, expressed his expectations for an unforgettable fight. The giant began the fight by using his aura skills, which caused a small earthquake in the arena. As it turned out, this race could also use magical energy for duels. But for giants, it was much more difficult to master than for ordinary people. For them, the time that needs to be spent on mastering the aura depends on the size, because these powers need to be accumulated. According to the conversation with Karen, Uruk didn't even notice how Leon quickly launched a counterattack towards Gaul. So he won the fight, and it created a huge stir. After such results, several more giants wanted to compete with Leon. We were not shown the next battles, but their results were analyzed by Elsid in the evening. The guy won twice, but lost 7 times, which made the sword spirit unhappy. The young man himself felt a certain injustice, because he did not understand who taught the giants to use the magical aura. However, the spirit of the sword answered him that it was he who did this 300 years ago. At this time, there was no race of giants on the planet yet, and only wild orcs wandered the earth. Some of them did not want to remain bloodthirsty monsters, so they begged the holy goddess to bless them. She agreed to this, and gave them a human form and the ability to think like real living people. However, she did not teach them how to talk and fight, and therefore entrusted this to Rodrigo. At first, the hero did not understand why the holy goddess entrusted him with a separate group of creatures. However, he eventually became a mentor to them, and thanks to him, all the members mastered human abilities. Leon could only marvel at how he was able to teach the race to speak, and use combat and magical skills. The spirit of the sword itself also told him about Kasim, who was the king of all the Titans. Even after Rodrigo's instruction, he continued to improve his physical skills to the level of a master. That's why the guy needs to focus on training and practical fights with other giants. This way, he will have the opportunity to face the main one of them in a fair fight in the future. Meanwhile, Elahan and Khan had already arrived in Blaine, having killed several people for their rudeness. The girl felt a certain relief that she had to see such noisy streets after all. She didn't want to know what would happen if the heretic's city devourer did come to life and wreak havoc on the city. Khan wanted to show Elahan the city's slums, but he was greatly surprised when he saw the sight before him. The dirty roads full of poverty and crime turned into a clean street with happy inhabitants. The company went to visit Jezer, the bishop, who at that moment was absolutely not expecting them. He was preparing to greet a new day within the walls of his church, when suddenly he heard a knock, signifying a visit. He immediately slammed the door, seeing his old friend Khan on the threshold. Jezer reminded that he, like everyone else, had not forgotten his bad deeds in the past. However, his expression changed when he recognized Elahan next to him. Indeed, at first he was surprised by her appearance, and then, surprisingly, he became very angry with her. As it turned out, The visit to Blaine was a deviation from the course, because all the representatives of the church and knights were looking for the Aerys. However, the bishop remembered that she had been inquisitive since childhood, and did not pay attention to any rules. Elahan did want to ask Jezer something about the day of prophecy, the moment when a new hero would appear. Indeed, a holy sword has appeared in the human world, and recently there have been cases of the city devourer and vampires. That's why the girl had the impression that this moment was about to come very soon. Meanwhile, Leon continued to fight the giants in the arena, and the spectators noticed that he was fighting better than before. He could now more easily dodge attacks and counter his opponent's moves with his holy sword skills. One day, it seemed like he was losing to the giant, but he suddenly disappeared. He attacked from the air, thus winning, which caused surprise among the spectators. Even Karen couldn't detect his movements, and so she felt jealousy at that moment. She then believed that she would not be needed by the guy if she turned out to be weaker than him. Meanwhile, Leon and his opponent expressed satisfaction with their previous battle against each other. The larger man then gave the young man a friendly blow on the back, without calculating the necessary force of the blow. Balkania later arrived at the arena and informed Leon that Qasim was ready to meet him. She was able to accompany him to the Rift, which is a forbidden area for those who do not have permission from the king. This crack became a haven for giants, because the holy goddess gave the task of destroying monsters from other worlds. The guy went down to the waterfall alone, where Qasim himself arrived incredibly quickly. The king of the giants did not believe that Leon was Rodrigo's successor because his signature skills were of sufficient level. He said that there were several other people with the guy who also learned the techniques of the great hero. However, they could not master them completely, and seemed to be in their mastery, so Qasim did not believe that with Leon everything was different. Elsid was surprised by such disrespect on his part, and so he decided to show himself to him in person. However, the giant was offended because he was still not on the same level of skill as the great hero. Then he decided to attack the guy and thus show him his strength. After some time, he agreed to teach the young man and became his temporary big brother. Qasim led Leon to a hideout where there were various plants and books that Rodrigo had written about martial arts and aura. It turned out that the legacy of the great hero was a training of willpower, pushing himself to the limits of life and death. Meanwhile, Karen had a dream in which she and Leon defeated monsters in a cave. However, the guy there was wounded and died, which made the girl feel guilty about it. The girl realized that in Blaine she was a serial killer, and no one there dared to challenge her. However, Leon's path was more difficult, and with his current abilities, it is very difficult to remain unscathed. Karen realized the need to not only train Leon, but also practice on her own. Indeed, she had not done this for a long time, thinking that her skills had already been developed to the highest level. She expected that after receiving the inheritance, the young man would become much stronger. However, when he returned, she was surprised by his frightened appearance and the flask with the tome in his hands. Inside the glass container was an elixir, and on the pages of the book were described the secrets of the hero's martial arts. And the guy, surprisingly, did not take everything for himself, but decided to give these things to Karen. Leon also said that he will temporarily live with Qasim and will train there. Then he went further and advised Karen to consume additionally those plants that he had also treated her to. The girl opened the book that was given to her and saw that it described the secrets of using the shadow aura. Meanwhile, in the Titan Mountains, Leon lay barely alive, but this was not enough to master the skill of willpower. Indeed, training this skill is a long process that cannot be mastered by anyone in a few days. Subsequently, Qasim threw Leon into a river with healing properties. Thanks to this, the guy came out of there like a new guy, although he was furious because of the new sensations. However, this training did not end for the young man, and now he will have to relive this experience again and again. Meanwhile, Karen, who had already read a lot from the book about the aura, joined the fights against the giants. One of them agreed to fight, and the audience noticed Karen's incredible speed and ability to use energy. Leon continued his fights against Qasim, who left him at death's door. However, he remained alive because he was subsequently thrown into the healing lake each time. One day, Leon, as usual, came out of the water after the preliminary test, and Elsid and the giant noticed certain changes. His eyes were shining, and he himself was now surrounded by magical energy. However, even with such confidence and determination, he still lost in the next fight. Also, the day was not far off when the restrictions on the Holy Sword would be removed, and thus the youth's strength would increase. We were reminded of Elmont, one of the older boys who Leon defeated during the fights at the academy. He once again proved his negative qualities by treating a strange man, who turned out to be Khan, badly. Elahan was next to him, curiously exploring the areas where Leon had previously studied physical skills. She also found the site of the first fall of the Holy Sword, which still left a large hole. As it turned out, the girl had long felt that someone was closely watching her, but she did not pay attention to it. At the same time, the familiar lion, a member of the royal family, emerged from the bushes, and there was an advisor next to him. They wanted to discuss with the Aerys a prophecy in which a boy named Lion was supposed to receive a holy sword. However, the girl assured them that the chosen young man had been fulfilling his duties for a long time, which no one could believe at first. Elahan suggested that there might have been a misunderstanding because everything pointed to Lion being the hero. However, later the young man realized that all these traits could only coincide with one person. Thus, he concluded that Leon was actually chosen for the role of the hero. It turned out that as a child, Lion wanted to kill one of his relatives in order to take the throne. But the boy was saved. Everyone believed that Lion, having fulfilled the prophecy, would be able to regain his royal status. And even now, the older man was telling the girl that it was the prince who was more worthy of the role of the hero. With these words, he attacked Elahan, and therefore she punished him, causing him several fatal injuries. Leon was surprised and also wanted to rush into the attack because he considered the advisor a family member. However, the girl, as before, used a special spell that heals all wounds and leaves a person alive. She also explained that Lion does not really put the well-being of the people first. He only thinks about how to get his throne back, and that is why he was not chosen to be the hero. And Leon really did pass all the tests that were required to develop willpower, and he did it quite timely, because the next day was Elsid's birthday. This was exactly the same moment from the prophecy that Elahan mentioned in her conversation with Jezer. The power released after the Holy Sword powers were fully activated could tear apart the physical body. That was why it was so important for the sword spirit to develop its will now. And so the North came. So at that moment, the sun united with the moon, and many stars appeared, lighting up the sky with them. Leon found himself in a blue space, in which he initially did not know how to navigate. However, later he saw that the holy goddess was already waiting for him there. She said that to meet her, you usually need to have a certain level that he didn't have yet. The goddess asked him if he was ready to continue on the hero's path. She asked him this because this fate, as we remember, was not assigned to him from the very beginning. A young man should not think that the future is full of honors for him, but that trials will still await him. Leon said that he lived his entire life with an inferiority complex and envy. Previously, the guy was marking time, and then Elsid came to him and helped him become better. He decided to continue on his way, and in response to this, the holy goddess gave him many different seals. Each of them significantly improved his physical skills, willpower, and insight. The young man was also given new clothes that resembled the image of the former great hero, Rodrigo. At this point, the audience ended, and Leon, dressed as a hero, fell from the sky to the surprised Elsid and Qasim. Leon's properties in the magic system already known to us have also changed. It also became known that not everyone gets as many seals and blessings as the guy did. And the great hero Rodrigo performed his duties without any additional benefits. Qasim decided to congratulate the young man in an original way and unexpectedly attacked him. However, Leon's new abilities made it possible to predict the exact time and place of the coming strike. With this knowledge, he was able to dodge effectively, and later decided to use the acceleration skill. However, the man did not allow the young man to deliver the finishing blow, noting that he still had a lot to learn. Subsequently, Kasim emerged from his hiding place and arrived at the giant's training area along with Leon. He surprised everyone present in this place, and Karen was also glad to finally see the young man. The guy noted that the girl had become much stronger during his absence. The adventurer herself also noticed positive changes in the young man and told him about it. The king of the giants himself announced that he had decided to hold a celebration in honor of Leon's awakening. It happened in a grand manner, and Leon also had to drink from a cup that was much larger than he was. When it was already getting dark, the guy talked to Karen, and she told him about her communication with the giants. For example, they shared with her a variety of interesting information about poisons and their production. However, the girl also admitted that her development had stopped, despite her intentions to improve them to the level of a master. Leon, surprisingly, expressed the same feelings and said that he could not connect the solitary head and body. Kasim intervened in the conversation, adding that this phenomenon has its own name, the gate phenomenon. This is what he called the phenomenon when a person, having achieved new skills, does not actually become stronger. To do this, they need to get a chance at enlightenment. And the giant agreed to help the adventurers with this. He gave the task to shoot the drake, but it turned out to be the same dragon they had encountered before. He was now one-eyed after being injured by Karen, and attacked other villagers instinctively. Leon also noted that the system is now able to show him new tasks, adding a feature to the enemy. The boy and the girl had already reached the canyon where, according to rumors, the one-eyed drake lived. At that moment they realized that just one mistake could cost not only their lives, but also many people. The dragon himself, seeing Leon, released a stream of his fire at him. However, he was able to easily diffuse the flames using one of Ursa Major's skills. Dark energy appeared nearby, which had already managed to cause significant damage to the surrounding monsters. Luckily, Leon survived after this thanks to his new advanced body. The guy decided to hide inside the canyon, and Elsid explained that there was a high concentration of aura in this place. Therefore, it is necessary to finish the battle with the dragon quickly, so that even more irreversible consequences do not occur. Suddenly, drops of dark energy were aimed at Leon, and so he had to dodge them. In an attempt to hide, the boy found himself in a dead end, where a dragon was able to find him and was preparing to attack him. However, the young man was saved by Karen, who got here with the help of one of the dark drops. She was able to use several new skills of her aura on the dragon, and it thus lost one of its wings. He suddenly concentrated his power to distract the adventurers for his own healing. Leon and Karen took turns attacking and defending themselves from the dragon's attacks. When this tired the enemy, the boy used his new skill of darkness, weakening the dragon. This also gave the girl the opportunity to attack another of the drake's eyes, leaving him blind. The monster used the skill of total darkness, but Leon was now able to see the enemy through the veil. He used another of his advanced skills and thus cut open his stomach. However, the wounded dragon was still able to attack, leaving Leon at death's door. However, he quickly used the power of the real aura to return to a near-perfect form. He first cut off the tail and then used the Big Dipper's final skill to win. Karen noticed that after using strong techniques, Leon no longer lost consciousness like before. The girl herself was amazed at the heights of aura control she was able to achieve during the battle with the dragon. Kasim confirmed her suspicions, and in the end called her almost a master in her field. The other giants of the village were also amazed at how the adventurers were able to defeat the dangerous drake. Balkania was most pleased with Karen, so she decided to give her something. The woman led the adventurer to a separate place and left Leon with the other giant men. They had already tried to cook the meat of the killed drake, but they couldn't fry it, so they decided to boil it. Later, the girl herself finally returned to the company, already in her new image as a warrior of giants. The most adventurous were the first to try the prepared drake dish. They were initially skeptical because they thought there might still be poison there. However, they liked the meat, And so began a celebration where the boy and girl could eat as much as they wanted. Meanwhile, Khan and Elahan had already traveled for 4 days and had already managed to get very close to the Titan Mountains. The girl was very fast, and the man, although he was Blaine's second strongest head, could not catch up with her. Meanwhile, at dinner, Leon discussed with Kasim the next goal of his journey. This must be a kingdom called Jugend, where Elahan was rumored to be located. Karen once again felt envy, realizing that the descendant of the holy goddess possessed great power and authority. It was the adventurer's last day in the village, so Kasim told Leon to continue training as he left. The giants also gave the adventurers many gifts, including daggers made from the bones and teeth of the drake. Karen also told Leon about the kingdom of Jugend, a place where the dwarves live. They were renowned blacksmiths, capable of producing quality weapons on their own. The main feature of their work is the celestial weapons, which are usually incredibly difficult to make. However, Elsid himself said that the swords that the dwarves produced were not the best things. That's why Leon thought that the great hero Rodrigo had managed to make a not very good impression of himself there too. Suddenly, he received a notification about a task. He had to destroy a demonic sword that one of the mercenaries owned. This weapon had the ability to suck the owner's blood and life force, turning him into his own puppet. Karen noticed signs of a fight on the road, which could indicate that the demonic sword was located somewhere around there. Near one of the trade caravans stood a mercenary, holding a weapon with negative energy in his hands. The guild leader hid in a safe place, and all the other fighters had already been neutralized. All these events frightened the only warrior left to fight against the new enemy. He thought he was already on the verge of death, but fortunately, Leon from Karen managed to save him. They easily recognized the mercenary and the guild, as they had traveled with her before. The guy asked the girl to take care of the other guild members while he was going to defeat the enemy. At first, no one understood why the young man wanted to fight such a strong enemy on his own. However, the victim did not even have time to utter a threat, as the mercenary was already lying on the ground with a destroyed sword. The other guild members were grateful for the adventurer's help and decided to guide them to their destination. Leon and Karen decided to interrogate the mercenary to find out more information about the demonic sword. A guy named Garland recently bought a new weapon from a regular blacksmith, and at first it didn't look that ominous. However, later, as he carried out orders to kill goblins, he became increasingly obsessed. Karen explained that experienced warriors are not susceptible to such sinister influences, unlike newcomers. The adventurers then wondered whether this was the only such sword, or whether there could actually be many more. Leon later received a new notification about a task concerning a monster polluting the minerals in the mines. It is because of this dark magic that weapons made from these substances can turn demonic. As it turned out, there were no lords or leaders in the kingdom of Jugend, and the territory was divided into separate zones. The caravan could not accompany Leon any further, so its leader decided to give the young man gold coins. A mercenary who had suffered from the demonic sword joined the team, and together they moved towards the guild. The leader of this department, unfortunately, could not take certain measures in the city without evidence of the existence of danger. So he asked adventurers to find them in the kingdom, giving them guild badges for expanded access. They also couldn't immediately find the blacksmith who sold Garland the demonic sword. As the adventurers were told, he had already moved to another area, and therefore he should be looked for there. However, there was one problem. This sector was located more than 100 kilometers from the current area. To get there quickly, the heroes decided to use a new means for them, a high-speed steam train. Leon from Karen was delighted during the trip because they had never seen such vehicles. Garland told the adventurers that the first region of the Jugend Kingdom was difficult to access. Indeed, there are many important buildings there, and they cannot be accessed without special permission. Subsequently, everyone was able to reach the sector, but they will have to leave the territory immediately after reaching the goal. The guy noticed that all the doors of the houses were covered with metal plates, because the blacksmith's ones were protected. The adventurers later reached the place where the blacksmith who sold the demonic sword was rumored to be. However, It was not the blacksmith who opened the door for the researchers, but one of the dwarves unknown to anyone. He treated the guests with hostility because he did not like people from the guild, whose badges were worn by the new arrivals. He also forbade the adventurers to visit the blacksmith, despite all their persuasion. Elsid did not like this attitude, so he asked Leon to borrow his body for a while. The boy's eyes lit up, his voice changed, and he approached the dwarf to whisper a message to him. It was a definite challenge to all the blacksmiths present, and the head of the workshop, named Pedro, agreed to accept it. According to legend, the great hero Rodrigo was able to destroy the rare metal, and from there, one of the most ancient traditions of the dwarves began. If a person breaks a weapon made of this metal, he will be able to ask the master for anything he wants, and if she fails, she will become his servant for 1 decade. Pedro had brought with him a halberd that seemed incredibly strong, and he expected Leon not to break it. Elsid advised Leon to use his new skill to see the energy surrounding the enemy's weapon. He once again captured the boy's body to show him the move that eventually broke the halberd. The blacksmith himself arrived at the workshop, to whom the heroes had a complaint about the sword. But he did not give any more information. He did not know where the materials were delivered from, so he advised visiting the archives. However, there was a problem waiting for them there too. They were immediately denied entry inside. Indeed, the information about the mines was at a level where one could not enter even with guild badges. Later, the manager of the archives, also a cardinal of the church, came to the guests, and his name was Erexon. Leon decided not to explain the task to him, but to let him hold his own holy sword, disguised. When the cardinal took it in his hands, it began to shine and showed its true appearance, so the man let the guests through. The man had a special mark on his hand that began to glow when he was exploring the mines one day, but it was too late, because enough ores had already been contaminated to create 100 swords. The cardinal decided to take radical measures. He wanted to create a group to find contaminated minerals. He also suggested allowing blacksmiths to test their weapons using blood. Thus, a mobilization of all warriors was announced in order to explore all the mines and clarify the circumstances. While Garland went to deliver the news, the cardinal expressed his honor to be present at the side of the future hero. Very quickly, groups were formed that together had to explore the neighboring mines. However, according to the plan, there were supposed to be 4 participants in the team, but only 3 adventurers showed up. That's why they added another A-rank girl to their ranks, who introduced herself to everyone as Geisel. Karen noticed that her greeting was ignored by the new girl, who was only interested in Leon. For example, I was surprised why the guy still only had rank B in the Adventurers Guild. This was because she felt that he was stronger than Garland, but weaker than Karen. In order not to reveal his identity as a hero to her, the young man invented that he had just begun his journey. Leon learned that the cardinal was able to communicate with a person even at a great distance using aura. The husband also said that the checks he had set up for the weapons were not working properly. In the forges, there were buyers who took the sword in their hands, poured blood on it, and chose it. This could indicate that the mineral-polluting monster was not the only threat. There could also be a separate side that contributed to the spread of weapons with demonic properties. The cardinal suggested that it might be chaos, one of the heretic factions Leon had met in Blaine. This organization had long had the status of enemies for the legendary hero and was divided into 3 sections. Destruction had already tried to summon the city devourer in Blaine, and despair and chaos were still unknown to us. The sections differed from each other in their cruelty and the methods of its implementation. However, the sword spirit didn't care about this and wanted Leon to fight as always. While the other fighters were uniting into small groups, the cardinal entered one of the most dangerous caves on his own. Once inside, the man was able to meet one of the heretic bishops who was responsible for despair. The team of adventurers had already moved into the isolated mine, and Geisel tripped on the rocks and fell, hugging Leon. She said that this is how she injured her leg and wanted to lean on the young man's shoulder on the road. However, Karen helped her by using her shadow skills and created a chair that could fly. Unexpectedly, the team stumbled upon a type of slime that released ribbons capable of destroying solid pieces of rock. This type of monster feeds on a rare and hard type of metal, and it was this that surrounded the core. Leon set out to complete this task because after the experience with the rock slime, he felt like an expert in this field. He cleared the team's path into the depths of the cave and managed to defeat a lot of slime. Jezer was amazed by his skills the whole way and imagined how she would soon have him under her control. We were told that there are only 9 leaders of the heretic organization, and they are on par with the cardinals of the church. There was a verbal altercation between the 2 bishops, so the luminous cardinal got his weapon to strike. Meanwhile, Jezer used her fiery aura to destroy the spiders that the team encountered along the way. The adventurer was surprised by their presence in the mines because usually they are very rare in these places. Suddenly, the girl began to act as if she was dizzy and leaned her head on the boy's chest. The adventurers felt an earthquake, and Leon realized that a battle between the cardinal and the bishop had just taken place nearby. They were subsequently joined in the mine communication by another group under the command of a man named Berger. While the man was telling everyone else about his adventures, Leon noticed that he was acting very strangely. At Elsid's command, he decided to attack him unexpectedly and cut off his hand with his sword. At first, none of the team understood why Leon did this, because they did not notice anything unusual about the man. However, everyone saw that Berger was no longer who he had been before, and that his body was wrapped in cobwebs inside. The same situation was with the other members of his team, and all the threads were connected at the top, where a large spider was already sitting. Leon received a notification that it was not an ordinary monster, but the king of this species. They often use visual illusions to catch prey and make copies of it using their threads. And inside the stomach were real people who could still be saved by destroying the web. Garland decided that this task would be very easy and used his sword to cut the threads. However, he found out that it was impossible to cut through with either physical attacks or aura skills. Then Karen advised not to cut, but to tear, and this was a much easier way to deal with the cobwebs. The young man noticed that he was surrounded by 100 identical burgers who were actually dolls. Jezer advised him to move towards the Spider King, and she decided to defeat all the copies together with Karen. However, she kept calling the girl incorrect versions of her name, which made her feel offended. The adventurer decided to make a bet with another girl to see who could kill the most dolls. Such competitions distracted the spider, and he no longer paid attention to Leon standing behind him. He was able to focus his powers and use one of Ursa Major's skills. With this, he was able to cut the spider, defeating it and discharging the living people. And in this way, all the dolls created by the monster that the girls had not yet managed to destroy disappeared. It also turned out that Karen and Jezer killed the same number of copies during the competition. If Leon had killed the spider later, the monster would have had time to create many copies of the people who attacked the city. Suddenly, a small piece of rock broke off from the ceiling of the cave and something was flying out of it. The team of adventurers looked up and noticed that it was actually a wounded cardinal who was falling. And above, on the street, there was already a bishop of the heretic organization that had caused damage to Aerys. Karen immediately used her shadow aura skills to restrict his movements with ropes. The heretic was left paralyzed, and Leon pressed his sword to his throat to stab him. At first, the man found it funny that some guy who looked weak was going to kill him. However, he still decided to reveal to the heretic his identity as Leon, the great hero. He used his blackout skill to cut off his head, and the man died that way. However, the cut-off ending merged with the corpse of the Spider King, and it seemed like a serious danger. However, it is known that every heretic had a curse that would cause the body to quickly self-destruct after death. Subsequently, a large explosion occurred, which managed to destroy part of the mine, but no one died. All the adventurers remained safe and sound, but Leon was slightly injured because he was standing in front. However, another threat soon appeared, meaning that this death was not the final test. In fact, she opened a portal to Mirror Canyon, the place where the Spider King came from. The heroes did not know how to close this door without causing harm to the surrounding city. Elsid said that his powers should not be relied upon, because they could not defeat the energy of the other world. Also, for the Big Dipper skill, you need to wield it perfectly and have excellent breath control. However, the situation was not hopeless. Aerys gave the boy a weapon created for the future hero. It didn't have a pre-made blade, because it was up to the person who would use it. Also, this sword can only be used once for the final blow. Leon moved towards the enemy, and upon activation, he saw that the blade had reached the required size. That's how he swung with all his strength and attacked the portal to another dimension to finally destroy it. All the team members were happy that Leon was able to save everyone from a large-scale threat. And the first to move towards the guy was Karen, who decided to examine all his wounds. However, the guy found himself in an awkward position because Geisel was pinning him from behind. And thus, albeit accidentally, the first kiss of another adventurer on the forehead occurred. Everyone felt awkward, but the girl herself called it a gift in honor of her reconciliation with Karen. Meanwhile, the sword that Leon used to destroy the portal self-destructed, and the guy gave the remains to the Cardinal. The other team, who had fallen victim to the Spider King, also woke up, and they managed to explain the whole situation to them. In general, the heretic divisions of Despair and Chaos have joined forces to create a joint operation. According to the plan, some released dangerous creatures, while others contributed to the spread of demonic weapons. The reaction to such events came late, because the adventurers did not realize the scale of the plan in time. And Aerys realized that by that time, some of the heretics had already crossed the border and moved to other countries. Meanwhile, some of the hostile people were actually thinking about a travel plan, and they chose the desert. Indeed, there were conflicts between nomads and humanoid beasts, and everyone could be given weapons. However, the caravan met Elahan, who was unhappy that she couldn't meet Leon because of them. That's why she decided to use her mace skills to punish the heretics who were in the back. The girl said that she received a message from the Holy Goddess, and so she found herself in the desert in time. Now that she had destroyed the heretics, she couldn't wait to meet Leon. Meanwhile, the guy was telling the team of victims about how he defeated the Spider King. At first, the men were surprised that the young man had to cut off their hands, but then they thanked him for such an act. Meanwhile, Karen remembered yesterday's kissing moment, and that's why she blushed all over. And several young men from another guild watched the girl and wondered if she was wasting her potential next to Leon. They decided to lure Karen into their guild, but their intentions were stopped by Cardinal Erexon. The man called her not just an adventurer, but a killer of the highest rank, and so all the guys ran away as far as possible. The team was subsequently invited inside the church's branch of the Order, where they were presented with a unique steel weapon. Leon also had a shield placed on his arm, which was a plate, but after activating the aura it took on a classic shape. As it turned out, this type of protection was special in that it responded only to certain types of aura, such as solar. And the girl was given 2 types of swords that can change size depending on how full they are of energy. After some time, another guest entered the room, which surprised the Cardinal, who was not expecting other people. It was actually Elahan, who was very happy to finally see the hero after a long journey. The Aerys was amazed when she first saw Leon with her own eyes. She constantly compared him to the sun, which does not want to go out under any circumstances. Both interlocutors shook hands, and the girl noticed the young man's rough, calloused hands. She immediately concluded that this was evidence of his continuous training with the sword. This action did not satisfy Karen, and she intervened in the conversation, introducing herself as Leon's first comrade. Elahan suddenly burst into tears and went to hug the girl, which surprised her at first. And then she said that she really felt sorry for the adventurer for her difficult childhood. Therefore, she was glad that the girl, despite all the difficulties, was able to become who she is now. Karen herself was pleased to hear words of gratitude, but she wanted to heal all the wounds of the past with her own efforts. In fact, Elahan was even younger than the adventurer because she had only recently come of age. After some time, Leon's team found themselves in a hot air balloon flying over the desert. Elahan was delighted to see the sands because she said She had only seen such expanses in books. Only now, when she received the status of Aerys, she was finally able to see this spectacle with her own eyes. It was also revealed that Leon received a token for reaching rank A in the Jugend Kingdom. At first, Elahan didn't understand why the young man hid his identity as a hero. He explained to her that he called it camouflage, to disguise himself from heretics and other enemies. Also, the heirs of the Holy Goddess also gave the badge to the adventurer so as not to reveal her true status. After all the formalities were completed, the heroes realized that they did not have a single task. Fortunately, Erikson predicted this and prepared 3 quests for the adventurers to follow. The list included a mission to Lion's home empire, an encounter with unfamiliar pirates, and conflicts in the desert. The Cardinal could not recommend moving towards the first task, since the question was more political. Therefore, the team chose a mission in the desert, where, as we remember, many clashes have appeared recently. Unfortunately, the airship could not accompany the adventurers across the desert, so they were thrown onto the dunes. While Elahan was amazed by the sand, Leon and Karen couldn't figure out where to go next. Then the Aerys took advantage of the goddess's blessing and, with the help of the mace, saw the right direction. However, as the team was heading along the indicated route, they noticed something that looked like a storm. However, in reality, these turned out to be monsters, sandworms, rapidly moving in the direction of the adventurers. Meanwhile, in another part of the desert, heretics were draining the life force from the nomads. They said that in this way they wanted to sow the seeds of war and the deaths of a large number of people. Elahan, upon seeing the sandworms, was able to destroy them with one swing of her mace, surprising the other team members. Drops of blood from the monsters had significantly stained Leon of Karen, and the Aerys suggested washing it all. However, the guy took advantage of the purification of the holy sword, thanks to which not a trace was left on him and the girl. However, Karen wondered why the sandworms were in such a large group. She said that such behavior is unusual for them, and they travel alone due to potential food shortages. It seemed to everyone that they were not actually hunting, but rather running away from someone in a hurry. However, people don't usually catch these creatures, so the team decided to investigate the reasons themselves. And Khan, who had previously accompanied Elahan, remained near the guild of the Jugend Kingdom. He didn't know until then that the Aerys had already moved along with the adventurers, and that's why he got angry at her. Others were forbidden to tell him her whereabouts, so the man decided to set out to find her. In a patch of desert, the team of adventurers found no traces, and they even wanted to leave this investigation. However, they later saw a group of bandits who, just in time, were advancing straight towards them. At this point, the researchers thought that now they would ask them all and find out what was happening here. In one city in the county of Redmond, a terrible massacre began, which was aimed at the nobility and soldiers. Lion had already arrived at this place and, together with his advisor, investigated the contribution of the heretics to this fuss. They were also assisted in the matter by Chloe, who blocked the entrance to the criminals who were trying to get inside. After all the events, the Viscount was very grateful to Lion for what he did for this city. Then he offered him to become his own military leader, in order to repay him for his help. In the desert, the adventurers were surrounded by Bedouins, members of a nomadic tribe, and they were hostile to the guests. Although Elahan wanted to disguise herself, she told the truth that the team came from the Holy Church. Fortunately, the nomads began to treat them better after this information, and told Leon about the situation. Lately, people and monsters have been disappearing from the desert, which is quite unusual for them. Indeed, they are able to withstand sandstorms, so they would certainly cope with any other threat. The Bedouins suggested that the adventurers find a village oasis, where a branch of the guild with explanations is located. The team had only one clue, that the unknown creature did not leave tracks in the sand. Everyone then understood that if it was not stopped in time, it could lead to a major war. In one part of the desert live beastmen, and in another, nomads, and all were not on the best terms with each other. However, with the constant expansion of territory and the encroachment of people into other people's territories, conflicts over resources may occur. The adventurers later reached a large oasis village called Nuas. However, they quickly noticed that, surprisingly, there was not a single living person on the streets. Everyone had already gathered at the ring, where the duel between the Bedouin and the representative of the Beastmen was to begin. A boy named Jezer decided to compete with the Wolf King's daughter, Hate, for the right to own a pasture. Elsid thought the man looked familiar, and Leon thought that this was once again connected with Rodrigo's adventures in his youth. However, this was not true, because usually such species cannot live long, and the sword spirit was just joking. The battle was fierce, and none of the spectators present could distinguish a single movement or technique of the two opponents. At home, she was already confident of her victory, but suddenly thorns appeared and flew towards her. After contact, they paralyzed both of her arms, and therefore the she-wolf could no longer fight in the usual way. The girl was confused, but she suddenly noticed some noise coming from the stands. She saw that another Bedouin, who was an assistant to the opponent, was sitting next to Leon's team. She became angry and used her heavenly martial arts skills to attack with her legs. Thus, she won this duel, and the beast race received their rights to own the pastures. At home after the fight, I wanted to approach the young man to thank him for this unintentional help. However, she seemed to like his smell, so she pressed herself close to his neck and slowly licked it. Everyone felt uncomfortable about this, and Elsid advised Leon to concentrate the solar energy in his palms and clap them. At first, no one understood why this was happening, but the wolf-like girl then fell to the ground, belly up. As the spirit of the sword explained, in the animal world, this gesture usually means submission to one's opponent. Elsid also said that 300 years ago, Rodrigo saved one of the humanoid wolves from slavery. After his release, the young man made him his squire and taught him the gesture of submission familiar to us. The wolf could only pass this knowledge on to his heirs, and it seemed that Kate was one of them. But she immediately realized that Leon was a hero, because her great-grandfather was the one Rodrigo saved. He was the one who told Hata that the only one who could conquer the Beastmen was this man's heir. She was very honored to meet the guy, and she began making plans for marriage and starting a family. This did not please Elahan and Karen, and they immediately moved towards her to urge her not to do it again. At dinner, we learned that in the Kata tribe, the elder was the one who was stronger, not the one who was born first. Also, after the stories, she was terribly frightened by the events that had recently happened in the desert. It was then that she was ready to act as an ambassador to the other beastmen to urge them to prepare for a possible war. However, she was only a contender for the role of leader of the Zagrai, and therefore did not yet have any great powers. She also had an opponent, another candidate for this position, her twin brother, who could also hinder her. Meanwhile, the guy himself, named Scroll, was drinking wine in the company of one of the representatives of the cat tribe. He did not understand why his father was against the life of luxury, which he seemed to enjoy so much. That is why he wanted to capture the entire desert in the future, after he became the leader of the Zagrai. But the house itself found this climate uncomfortable because of the heat, the abundance of sand, and the constant smell of dirt. The road to the steppe was not that long, and everyone tried to reach this place before evening. However, unexpectedly, Hate was surrounded by shadows of representatives of the cat tribe. They said that they did not want to leave the girl until the moment when Scroll was elected as the leader of the clan. Karen, seeing this, immediately used her aura skills to drive away the imaginary images. Thus, only the real bodies of humanoid cats remained outside, which formed the basis. They became scared after this and decided to turn their attention to Elahan, who looked the weakest of them all. However, they did not immediately realize that they were wrong and also decided to attack with their mace skills. One of the humanoid cats lost consciousness after these events and later woke up surrounded by adventurers. He saw his tied paws and was unable to tell the observers anything, although Kate already understood what was happening here. She decided that her brother was afraid that she would be able to prevent him from becoming the leader of the pack. That was why, in her opinion, he called the soldiers from the cat tribe to help him detain her. Scroll himself was calmly spending his day in the steppe, and suddenly Kate entered his tent. The brother and sister immediately began to insult each other as soon as they met under the same roof. In the end, the girl said that it was a pity to join forces with representatives of another tribe. As proof of her words, she threw away the skin of the son of the king of the cat tribe, whom she met during her wanderings. At that moment, no one wanted to listen to her stories about how it was he who attacked her on the way to the valley. Instead, they began to make accusations regarding Kata's bad attitude towards other tribes without reason. This dispute was observed by adventurers outside the tent, who did not know whether to interfere in this conversation. And then they noticed that next to them was her father, the current leader of the wolf pack named Barg. He immediately entered the tent and asked the stormy relatives to stop their quarrels. The leader of the cat tribe immediately took advantage of this to escape from the scene of events together with his son. Barg didn't like the fact that his children, even as adults, still behaved like little children. Even now, he didn't know when they would finally grow up to inherit his status in the future. He also turned his attention to Leon because he wanted to see for himself that there was a hero standing in front of him. And in the desert, the Bedouin travelers saw an amazing pharaoh who wanted to take away their life force. He was able to suck the life energy out of several people using dark magic. Thus, the creature was able to partially regain its appearance and withstand the sun's rays for a short time. Meanwhile, Leon entered into a duel with Barg, who wanted to test his fighting skills. The husband decided to set additional rules, and if his feet left the ground, the guy would win. The young man swung to strike, and as a result was able to fulfill the conditions needed for victory. Barg realized that he had lost so badly, and then he could not admit his defeat so quickly. So he decided to use one of the heavenly martial arts skills to finally overcome Leon. But he was able to dodge the attack in time, and the man stopped taking any additional measures. After the fight, he noted that he had not competed with anyone as energetically as he did with the young man for a long time. He also, as it turned out, already understood Hata's ambiguous views directed at Leon. And so, without asking others for their thoughts, he decided to give this couple his blessing for their future marriage. Everyone was puzzled, and the guy used a technique he was already familiar with to throw the man to the ground. In the evening, the adventurers told Barg about the situation, which could potentially escalate into a bloody war. The husband then decided to call a council of the leaders of the humanoid animals in order to subsequently move towards the desert. And Leon had to go to the nomad settlement to tell them about the plans for armed conflict. In the evening, the team of adventurers made a stop, and the girls began to prepare dinner for everyone. And Leon sat in thought, and felt behind him a large green eye looking only at him. The guy was very tense and asked Karen and Elahan if they had seen anything strange. However, they, unlike him, did not know about the existence of this eye, and therefore gave a negative answer. The young man noticed that one eye subsequently turned into a large head, similar to a pharaoh. The creature didn't understand why the boy was the only one who could see him, since he looked like an ordinary person. After saying these words, Leon cut the head in half using his sword skills, and it instantly disappeared. Elsid praised the boy for using his skills against the pharaoh, who turned out to be named Nephron-Ka. We were told that during his life he worshipped the sun god, but one day he decided to put himself on his level. The husband then decided to use the teachings of the heretics in order to achieve the status of a demigod. However, for such actions, he was stripped of all his titles and cursed, which is why he was later reborn as a creature of death. It seems that the organization wanted to summon him, but the ritual was incomplete due to a lack of resources. Since then, the pharaoh wanders the desert and absorbs the souls of nomads in order to become a perfect god. It was now clear that the heretics had planned the war so that the energy of the dead would become food for the pharaoh. According to the adventurers, the enemies could already guess that Leon was planning to stop this. That is why the team decided to move towards people as soon as possible to tell new information. Meanwhile, one of the representatives of this tribe finally arrived in the neighboring Bedouin village. Everyone, of course, was delighted at his arrival. But, as it turned out, He was no longer alive at that time. Also, other dead people instantly rose from the ground and immediately moved towards the residential area. In a short time, the dead were already wandering throughout the village and attacking all living residents. One group of them, for example, moved towards a single mother with a small child and almost killed them. However, help quickly arrived. Leon used the Big Dipper skill, and Karen calmed the boy down. Elahan also had her hands full, standing at the entrance to the city where more of the dead were heading. The guards at first did not understand why the girl was standing alone and saw how she instantly neutralized the enemies. The adventurers decided to inspect the village territory once again, in case of urgent need. Meanwhile, the pharaoh was watching Leon from above, and it seemed he recognized him as the guy from the night meeting. During the battle with the zombies, the Bedouins noticed that their transformed leader retained his fighting skills. Leon, who recognized the special mark of slavery on her husband, immediately moved towards the fighters. The youth used his powers of purification to turn his head back to his former appearance. The man remembered how, before these events, the pharaoh had turned him into a zombie using magic. So he decided to warn Leon that not only this village was in danger, but also the neighboring ones. Indeed, the pharaoh attacked 4 Bedouin settlements simultaneously with his army. Leon suggested that Karen and Elahan split up, and he himself moved to the largest of the settlements, Nuwas. Although there were twice as many zombies there, the settlement also contained the pharaoh himself. In the evening, a group of heretics were disappointed that the operation in one of the villages had failed. They suspected that the heir to the powers of the holy goddess had intervened in the matter. They believed that she had arrived at the wrong time because Neferenka's body had not yet been fully restored. The heretics no longer cared about the defeat in the village, and they decided to focus on Nuvas. Indeed, with a larger population, the pharaoh's plans could be achieved much more quickly. Meanwhile, Leon and the head of the previous village had already headed to their destination. But they arrived too late, because the zombies had already captured all of Nuvas. The head of the village, together with his assistant, were frightened by the fact that enemies were approaching them. Leon moved to help them. However, he was unable to complete it completely because his sword was stopped by the pharaoh. Elahan arrived at her village just in time, because at that time the dead were not yet out. Zombies emerged from the ground immediately after the Aerys appeared, and she swung her mace to strike. And the pharaoh was no longer interested in learning about the guy who had defeated his projection earlier. Everything was the other way around, and he was immediately convinced that Leon would die instantly. The enemy began to strike the young man with heavy blows with his sword and threw him into the nearby wall. Then he realized that even the unfinished body of the pharaoh was capable of doing such things. No matter how hard he tried to increase the distance between himself and the pharaoh, he couldn't do it. It seemed as if Leon was about to die, but by that time the sun had already begun to rise. This was the pharaoh's only weak point, so he pardoned the boy for a short time. At the same time, all the zombies in Nuvas disappeared, which surprised all the residents. But Karen has yet to face her opponents on clear day. One day she found herself in a difficult situation because one of the dead men grabbed her tightly. However, the girl was saved by Hate, who went on the attack with her brother. According to her, representatives of different tribes of humanoid animals moved to help in the fight against zombies. Karen was quickly able to defeat the dead man, who had previously grabbed her tightly and would not let go. Now that the enemy was defeated, the girl decided to return to Leon. The guy himself fainted after meeting the pharaoh and was able to notice how Elahan tried to revive him. He woke up in a lonely room, his body hooked up to an IV. The Aerys herself immediately moved towards the young man, happy to see him alive. Fortunately, almost all the villages were safe, but the girl could not help him against the pharaoh. Leon was determined because he knew that Neferenka would arrive that same evening. And the heretic became even more disappointed when they learned that they had not been able to capture Nuwas. They had already despaired of their plans, and suddenly the pharaoh addressed the members personally. He decided to deal with what was preventing his full resurrection on his own. To do this, he absorbed the souls of heretics and thus gained the ability to walk on two legs. Evening came and Leon gathered all the strongest Bedouin warriors in one place. He was confident in himself, knowing that today was the day to defeat the pharaoh. At night, a large pyramid appeared in the middle of the desert, which surprised everyone present. Neferin-Ka was already standing at its top, having managed to frighten almost all the warriors at once. At first, Leon wanted to use one of Ursa Major's skills to get to the god, but he was able to stop the attack with just his dagger, and the blow did not hit him. Elihan wanted to help too, so she swung her magic mace. At first the pharaoh pretended that no harm had been done to him, but his hand began to bleed, and Elihan said it was retribution for all the damage done to Leon. Subsequently, Neferin-Ka recovered from all his wounds and remained confident in his omnipotence,